Chapter 381, Charge Complete. Saul's expression changed drastically, and the calm he had just maintained collapsed in an instant. You! Concha withdrew her foot and turned to glance at the ancient soul-devouring mire, still entangled with frost. Unfortunately, I can only control part of the tentacles. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been blocked by this palace for so long. She continued, looking down at Saul. No need to struggle, just be obedient and listen to me. Now that Concha had discovered the secret of his palms, Saul didn't bother pretending anymore. He bared his teeth and cried out in pain. Ah, you! Are you dragging me into this whole conversation, refusing to just finish me off quickly, because you want my mind to collapse and turn me into veiled crystal essence too? Concha nodded with satisfaction. That's right. So I hope you'll be as well behaved as the first time we met and not play any tricks or schemes. That way, I'll make good use of your transformed veiled crystal essence, so you won't be wasted, such a special existence. Her eyes were filled with madness. If Gorsa finds out I used his stuff, he'll definitely be furious. Haha, but with the state he's in now, he wouldn't dare come in to catch me. He can only stomp his feet outside in frustration. Just thinking about it makes me so happy. For a moment, Saul couldn't tell whether Concha truly wanted his mind to collapse, or if she was simply chasing madness itself. But looking at her now, Saul felt a chill spread through his heart. After laughing for a while, Concha pulled her foot back, squatted down and looked at Saul. But there's no need to feel sorry for him. Do you really think he trained you out of kindness? Concha tilted her head, tracing the blood at the corner of Saul's eye with a finger. Did he tell you he wouldn't interfere with your studies to avoid misleading your understanding? Saul narrowed his eyes slightly. Master Gorsa had indeed said something like that. I've heard that kind of talk too. That's why I agreed to the final transformation. He's just pretending to let you research yourself, while quietly seasoning you into something more delicious. When his experiments actually need you, he'll turn the grateful you into his raw material. Do you know Ivan? He studied hard, meditated diligently, and completed his body modification with great effort. But do you know what happened to him in the end? His carefully modified body was ground into paste by Gorsa and made into a graceful shadow coat for Lady Yura. Shadow coat. Saul instantly thought of Lady Yura, whose body was a silhouette that could blend into various mediums. So that shadow was made from the body of one of Gorsa's students. Concha withdrew her hand, then raised her blood-stained finger to her vivid red lips, speaking somewhat indistinctly. With such excellent aptitude for mental power, Gorsa must have had an eye on you. I've heard that his resurrection experiment has made breakthrough progress. I think your soul will soon be taken. Did he give you some kind of 3 or 5 year deadline? That's just a lie to keep you obediently working for him. Saul said nothing, but his face grew increasingly grim. His lips were tightly sealed, the color drained from them. Concha knew Saul was getting nervous. He was nervous because even if he survived today, he couldn't escape Gorsa's claws. Death might actually be the best outcome. Worse than death was having his soul refined, enduring endless pain and torment for all eternity. To long for death and be denied it. She could sense that Saul's once extremely stable mental form had begun to tremble. Because the long-held beliefs in his mind had been upended in a single night. Saul clenched his teeth and his voice came trembling through the gaps. I admit we share a common enemy. That's all the more reason we shouldn't kill each other. Your method of ascending through veiled crystal essence is extremely dangerous. Let me go. I'm very good at body modification. I might be able to help you. But Concha only shook her head. Whether you're sincere or not, thank you, Saul, but it's already too late. 3 years ago, when I took that elven doll, I stepped onto a path of no return. Elves are stubborn creatures. After being influenced by the elf, I became even less able to accept what I'd been transformed into. Did you know? I used to be very beautiful and I had great talent. Even without Gorsa's modifications, I was confident I could advance to a third-rank apprentice. But I had no choice. I gave up on myself and lost my future. So, I have to find myself again, even if it means opposing Gorsa, even if it means enduring the pollution of the elves. She paused. At that time, my eyes had already gone out of control. Without the elven relic's suppression, I would have been completely corrupted long ago. From that point on, I didn't dare stay too long in the wizard tower. I was afraid Gorsa would notice something was wrong. Suddenly, Concha pressed both her hands to her temples. With a bit of pressure, pop, she removed her head. Beneath the beautiful face, Saul saw a familiar half of a lovely woman's face. But the glass dome atop Concha's head had changed. The once milky white substance had turned into dried reddish mucus, stuck to the inner wall of the dome, half dried and clinging. And those eyeballs that sometimes surfaced and sometimes vanished, now lacking buoyancy, lay curled at the bottom of the glass dome. A thick layer of white fuzz covered the eyeballs, like food left in a trash heap for months. The moment Saul laid eyes on this scene, his mental form boiled like a pot of water. He struggled desperately to suppress the violent chaos of his mind, terrified that the steam would blast his skull apart. Concha, Saul gritted his teeth, you've already mutated. But Concha didn't care at all. Yes, but it's fine. Once I obtain the veiled crystal essence from your collapse, I'll be able to use your high-quality soul power to replace my locator device. She patted her still beautiful head. How about the head of an elven king? Hee. I'll be the first one in the wizard tower to replace locator device. Once I fully fuse with it, I'll gain complete control of the ancient soul-devouring mire. Then I'll personally take revenge on Gorsa. Concha's head suddenly leaned in close to Saul's eyes. Even if Saul closed his eyes, he could still see the white-furred eyeballs and congealed blood inside that head. Concha also sensed that Saul's mental form was growing increasingly unstable, already showing signs of losing control. The time was ripe. Concha smiled with satisfaction. A collapsing mind, the special field of the Forest of Four Seasons, and a dash of soul-devouring mire corruption. She was about to obtain a perfect piece of veiled crystal essence. Concha's lips stretched into a wide grin, all elegance and charm now gone. No, I can only hold on this far. Saul's breath was faint. Suddenly, in a moment of utter despair, he opened his eyes wide and looked straight at Concha's face, shouting, Penny. Concha froze. Then she chuckled. A stunning beauty like me is sitting right next to you, and you're calling out another woman's name. But just as she finished speaking, she suddenly saw a flash of silver light, and then a silver butterfly appeared out of thin air, landing on Saul's forehead. What's this? Concha's mind instantly flashed through everything she had ever learned, but none of it matched the image of this butterfly. Then she heard the butterfly speak. Emotion module suppression complete, Brother Saul. Emotion. Concha didn't even have time to think about why emotions needed to be suppressed. The next moment, she saw Saul suddenly open his mouth, clenched for so long, and extend a tongue that was deep gray, nearly black. At the tip of his tongue, somehow, using an unknown intricate method, was drawn an extremely complex magic formation. Concha had a good memory. She instantly recognized that this formation looked very similar to the one on Saul's palms. In fact, it was an advanced version of the formation in his palms. And now, this magic formation was emitting a dazzling black glow. The moment she saw that black glow, Concha's consciousness faltered. But she quickly snapped out of it and pointed angrily at Saul lying on the ground. That mental form instability just now, it wasn't a sign of collapse at all. That's right, Saul's voice suddenly became relaxed. He retracted his tongue, and countless gray translucent tentacles suddenly grew out from his back. These tentacles hooked onto Concha's arms and raced at a speed that was completely impossible to dodge, and lifted her up directly. Concha tried to struggle, but found that she could not get rid of these tentacles at all. She could use her mental power to control these tentacles just now, but now she was easily bound by them. Saul, who had just been imprisoned by the ice spikes, got up from the ground with a swift movement. Concha's head was pressed by the tentacles, and she was forced to turn her gaze back to Saul. Then she was shocked to find that the man in front of her not only had no wounds on his body, but even his appearance had changed. Saul actually changed from a 15 or 16-year-old boy to an adult man with a slightly similar appearance. Chapter 382, Absolute Suppression. Who are you? Concha heard her own voice trembling. Everything before her eyes had already completely exceeded her understanding. Not only had the person she'd been suppressing all along gotten up from the ground unscathed, even the surroundings had completely changed. The circular hall had become a stone platform suspended in the void. And all around the platform was darkness densely filled with stars. Those stars twinkled as if something was watching her. Under the eerie starlight's gaze, Concha's entire body trembled. She didn't know how she had come to this place. The power within it was even more terrifying than the elves' mental realm. Concha thought her soul body would collapse immediately. But it didn't. Her soul body was even more stable than ever before. She hadn't experienced such peace and calm in a long time. Now you should recognize me. Seeing Concha's frightened gaze fall on him, Saul's facial muscles began to squirm and deform. A few seconds later, he had transformed into a face familiar to Concha. Only the young man from before was now a head taller than her. Saul. Seeing the familiar face, the fear in Concha's heart slightly reduced, and the instinct to survive began to rise again. She tried to borrow the power of the Elf King, hopping to break free from the tentacles binding her, but discovered that the beautiful head was no longer at her side. That head, with which she had already formed a connection, had not followed her into this strange and terrifying space. But she did not panic. Instead, she quietly activated her soul body to send out a call. At last, large patches of flickering black began to appear around her body, as if a brush were painting the air black again and again. But before Concha could rejoice, she discovered that the blackness around her was rising rapidly, as if being drawn away by something. Following the direction of the flying shadows, she looked up and saw, to her shock, a massive leather-bound book suspended overhead. The book lay open. It was dozens of meters long and more than 10 meters wide. She had never seen such a large book before. But it wasn't the size of the book that shocked her. What truly stunned Concha was that this book was absorbing the spiritual energy of the Elf King she had summoned with great effort. Even more terrifying, after staring at the book for just a few seconds, Concha felt her own spiritual energy beginning to be drawn away as well. She quickly looked away and stared at Saul in disbelief. "What are you?" She didn't dare look at the presence above her again, didn't even dare ask what it was. "You still remember, when I killed Seed, you asked me why he went to such great lengths to target me." Concha's eyes widened. So it was actually. She didn't dare speak of the presence above her. She could already feel the immense terror. But if Saul truly possessed such a horrifying trump card, why had he let her hurt him just now? If he had brought out that thing above his head right away, even the ancient soul-devouring Meyer would have fallen silent. And how could an apprentice possibly control such a terrifying power? Of course, Concha didn't know that Saul's ability to use the diary's power was limited. Only within his mental realm could he sense the diary's might. But this might was only for intimidation. It couldn't truly be wielded by Saul. Like those golden pages, beautiful but only to look at. But for frightening enemies, they were exceedingly effective. Without the power of the Elf King's head, Kanksha was no match for Saul. Even regular third-rank apprentices couldn't defeat Saul, let alone Kanksha, who was still a second-rank apprentice due to having switched locator devices. And Kanksha understood this as well. Her legs went weak. Pressed down by the tentacles surrounding her, she slumped powerlessly to the ground. So all along, while I was trying to lure you into losing control, you were preparing to drag me into this terrifying place. Heh! No wonder you kept clenching your teeth, refusing to open your mouth. She looked somewhat dazed. I kept rambling on, waiting for you to snap. Ended up putting on a farce for your amusement. That's why villains always die from talking too much, Saul thought, expressionless. Though Kanksha had talked so much in order to agitate his soul and push him toward losing control, Saul would not give Kanksha a chance to turn things around. He knew that even though this woman looked as if she had admitted defeat, her spiritual energy was still active. She was still trying to find a way to escape. Kanksha, Saul opened his mouth, prompting Kanksha to look up at him. Then he stretched out one hand. A mirror like liquid mercury appeared before her. So this is what you really look like. The mirror clearly reflected Kanksha's soul. Her soul looked only 18 or 19, at the height of her youth and beauty. Kanksha stared at her reflection in the mirror and slowly opened her mouth. She reached out and gently caressed her own face. Unlike when she had touched the Elf King's face earlier, her fingers now moved carefully, trembling slightly, as if she feared that too much pressure would shatter the illusion before her. Now she had completely lost any desire to run, or to scheme, or to beg for mercy and wait for a better opportunity. She only wanted to look at the girl in the mirror, to see the version of herself that had been forcefully erased by Gorsa. And as Kanksha was lost in her mirrored image, the suction cups on the tentacles binding her opened into mouths filled with sharp teeth. Kanksha didn't notice the killing intent closing in from all around her, or perhaps she did, but knowing she had no power to resist, chose to remain still. Only when several tentacles sank their teeth into her soul did Kanksha's lips tremble faintly, but her eyes never left the mirror. Saul stood just behind the mirror, his face expressionless as he watched Kanksha's soul gradually fade and thin out. He raised his right hand. The diary above his head shrank rapidly and drifted down, quietly hovering above his palm. The diary remained open. By now, several new lines of prophecy had appeared on its pages. When Saul had lured Kanksha into the palace, the diary had already issued a death warning, but Saul had only glanced at it and then set it aside. In his plan, he had already prepared several contingency measures, some of which could just barely avoid Kanksha's killing moves. Seeing that there were no new alerts in the diary, Saul moved his fingers. With a snap, the diary closed. SHFF, 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 SHFF. 4 figures appeared behind Saul. As they gazed at Kanksha's vanishing soul, fear surfaced in their eyes. The longer they spent inside the diary, the deeper their dread of it grew, and the more inscrutable they found its owner, Saul. Just what kind of person could control something so terrifying? As Kanksha's figure faded to near transparency, Saul suddenly withdrew all his tentacles. He sent the 4 soul bodies back into the diary, then closed his eyes and opened them again, exiting the hard-won mental battlefield. Back in the real world, Saul was still pinned to the ground by several ice spikes, and Kanksha, who had previously been crouched beside him, had already collapsed. Having absorbed Kanksha's soul energy in the mental battlefield, Saul's previously rattled soul body had now stabilized. Magic flowed once more through his body. With a jolt, he shattered the ice spikes that had pierced his limbs and were now no longer controlled by any master. Then Saul conjured a magic scroll between his fingers. It was for lesser healing. A white light swept across him. Together with his own regeneration ability, within seconds, he was moving freely once more. But Saul did not get up right away. Instead, he sat relaxed beside the fallen Kanksha. In the distance, black tentacles and white frost still tangled and clashed. Sections of the palace continued to collapse. The ancient soul-devouring mire seemed to have realized that Kanksha had failed, and there was a faint hint of retreat in its movements. Suddenly, a cracking sound beside him drew Saul's attention back. Kanksha's glassy half-skull split open, and a few eyeballs rolled out. But this person, who looked deader than dead, suddenly spoke. "Am I beautiful?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Saul sighed. His not yet fully healed arm rested loosely on his knee. "You're the most beautiful." Chapter 383, The Eye of Banishment. Kanksha's red lips had already turned purple, but they still curved up faintly. "In my eye there is a very special one. It is a half-elf's eye. If Gorsa wants to use you as material, then eat it. Being half-mad is better than being dead." Saul was stunned. He suddenly recalled the long-term prophecy recorded in the diary. Could it be that the thing the diary had guided him to seek in the Elven Valley was not some treasure, but Kanksha's eye? Then why had it not reminded him the last time he met Kanksha? Had something changed? Saul reached out and pushed aside several eyeballs covered in white hair. Without Kanksha's enhancement of mental force, they were merely disgusting rather than threatening. Behind them, he found an eyeball with a black pupil, one that had not mutated with hair. The eyeball felt very hard to the touch, almost like it was made of crystal. At that moment, the diary in Saul's mind flipped open. April 6, year 317 of the lunar calendar, clear day. This is an eye that blends hardness and fragility. It is the abandoned power of a half-elf. It can reveal illusion and truth to you, but it will also draw the pursuit of corruption. The eye of banishment. Hush, do not meet their gaze. Just then Kanksha spoke again. "Heh, you deliberately kept me alive, just to find it, didn't you?" "Little liar." Kanksha's lips began to tremble uncontrollably. Her lower body suddenly shattered into countless pieces, like an ice sculpture smashed against the ground. "Fine, I hope you can deceive Gorsa too. Those of the Glare family, they are best at using people. Let him taste what it is like to be used." Cracks had already spread from Kanksha's legs to her chest and abdomen. Kanksha suddenly screamed with all her strength, "Gorsa, if I cannot advance to third rank, then you can forget about reaching third rank too. I will wait for your mutation in the abyss." Crack! As if she had expelled her final breath, Kanksha shattered entirely, transforming into transparent ice crystals that quickly melted into a dirty puddle of water mixed with impurities, flowing across the floor. The strongest second-rank apprentice of the Wizard Tower, the madwoman who once dared to use the Elven King's head, thus completely vanished from the world. Flakes of snow suddenly filled the air, swirling within the palace hall. A silver butterfly flitted through the snow and landed beside Saul. "How strange, Brother Saul, how can it be snowing in the Elven Valley? There is no winter season here." Could it be a lingering effect from Kanksha? Saul initially thought so. But when he saw snow drifting through several halls ahead, he denied that guess. Kanksha's power could not affect such a wide range. "Brother Saul," the staircase appeared. With Penny's reminder, Saul quickly turned around. Sure enough, the twisted staircase had appeared once again in the hall. "Let us hurry and return the Elven King's head to the pure white throne." Saul stood up and picked up the beautiful head from the ground, only then realizing that in his eyes, the Elven King's face had turned into a beautiful woman with black hair and black eyes. "Penny, what does this head look like to you?" Penny immediately answered crisply. "Silver eyes, long silver hair, looks just like us nightmare butterflies." As expected, the Elven King's appearance changed according to one's aesthetic perception. Saul rotated the head in his hand. He remembered that Concha once wore it over her own head. Thus, the head should be hollow inside. Just as he thought so, he saw a hole at the base of the head, but it was obviously not large enough to fit Concha's head. It must have been magic at work. The Elven King looks so beautiful outside, but inside is so disgusting. Saul glanced at the wound on the head for just a moment before turning his gaze away in disgust. He dared not recall the scene he had just seen. If he did, he would not be able to suppress his urge to vomit. How can something like this be brought out? Saul took a deep breath. Let us go. Before leaving, he looked again at the water stains on the ground. They were already half-dried and no longer resembled a human form. Ascending the twisted staircase, Saul found that even within the second-floor space, disordered snowflakes floated around. Then the third floor, the fourth floor too. After the fifth floor, Saul closed his eyes. Yet even so, he could still feel the coolness of snow landing on his face. When he reached the ninth floor, a white radiance pierced through his eyelids, making Saul realize he had successfully arrived at the ninth level. He opened his eyes and saw the red carpet, and at its end, the pure white throne. Penny fluttered to Saul's side. "Brother Saul, you just need to place the treasure onto the throne." Saul nodded. Step by step, he walked toward the pure white throne, yet the head in his hand was not immediately placed down. "Penny." "I am here, Brother Saul. If I return the elves' treasure to them, will they truly open the way out of the Elven Valley?" Penny fell silent for a moment before slowly replying. "Brother Saul, in truth, the passage out of the valley has never been sealed. It is the people here who are imprisoned by their own inner desires." "You see things clearly. Tell me the reason." Saul was surprised. He had not expected this. Penny lightly landed on an ornate carving at the back of the throne. "Brother Saul, you can see it too, right?" Following Penny, Saul placed his hand on the throne. Instantly, the room plunged into darkness. When he turned around, he unsurprisingly saw the black, white, and gray planet appear behind him. The massive planet still rotated slowly. When it appeared, it was the continents of Stat, Nefret, and Iskaper that faced Saul directly. Saul's heart stirred. The planet suddenly accelerated its rotation, revealing the other side, the one with a massive sinkhole. That side was as dark as ink, seemingly forever cloaked in shadow. Only the tips of occasional surging tsunamis carried a trace of pale white. The deepest part of the sinkhole seemed to reach the Earth's core, perhaps even deeper. Saul did not know if this pit would continue to deepen. If it did, would one day another continent from the other side emerge from it? Would a black tide gush forth and engulf everything? "Are you talking about this sinkhole?" he asked softly. Penny flew up and landed on Saul's shoulder. "Yes, Brother Saul. It was only after seeing this sinkhole and entering the world of the elves that I understood why they suddenly disappeared from the world." Saul froze. Penny had entered the elves' world. Has she truly met the elves? And Saul himself did not know whether he ought to seek the truth behind the elves' disappearance. Yet thinking about it, he had already obtained the half-elf's eye and even intimately interacted with the Elven King's head. Was it not a bit too late to talk about avoiding danger now? He took a deep breath and examined his mental body. State excellent, suitable for madness. Then what exactly happened to the elves? Why did this depression lead to their disappearance? Brother Saul, the scene you see now is actually a fragment once witnessed by the Elven King. Back then the old king had just died and the new king ascended. Originally the Elven King only had the peak strength of a third-rank wizard. With the aid of the Elven King's title, he squeezed into the world of the fourth rank. This was not necessarily a bad thing, but he should not have, while his realm was still unstable, borrowed the entire tribe's mental collective to observe a fragmentary truth of the world. Penny sighed. Perhaps he simply wanted to prove he was no worse than the old king. You mean the new elven king, after seeing the sinkhole, led his entire race to destruction? What exactly is a sinkhole? Saul asked. Penny smiled bitterly. I do not know either, Brother Saul. If I did, I would have gone mad by now too. Chapter 384, The Elven World. Penny was also unsure about the sinkhole on the far side of the planet. Saul opened the diary and consulted the other consciousnesses. But even the well-traveled Agu had never heard of the sinkhole's existence. Could it be that someone is deliberately suppressing information about the sinkhole? Saul touched his chin in thought. As expected, information capable of bringing about the extinction of the elves would not be simple. He asked, then what did the Elf King do afterward? Penny said, the elves told me that after ascending the throne, the Elf King initiated a plan involving the entire race. Oh, Saul thought he was about to hear something critical. But this plan, you should come see it yourself. Penny flew up again, circled once in front of Saul, and then landed on the tapestry hanging from the back of the pure white throne. The moment the silver butterfly touched the tapestry, she disappeared. At the same time, a small silver speck appeared on the tapestry. Am I supposed to enter this tapestry too? Saul raised his hand and reached out with his fingertip toward the tapestry. During this whole time, the diary remained unresponsive. His fingertip touched the surface of the tapestry, but nothing happened. At that moment, Penny's voice continued to ring in Saul's mind. Brother Saul, did you know? Nightmare butterflies are actually a creation of a powerful wizard. Unexpectedly, Penny had brought up a different matter. The great wizard who created us was actually a half-elf. He was really powerful, but after the elves vanished from the world, he did not last long and also died. Or rather, he was destroyed, unable to be accepted by this world. Brother Saul, back then I didn't understand why Father had died. But today, after seeing these poor elves, I finally understand. This world does not allow independent consciousness to exist. The world does not allow consciousness to exist independently. Hearing those words, Saul suddenly felt a wave of dizziness. He had to grip the back of the throne to avoid collapsing. He blinked a few times and shook his head, suddenly recalling a question Gorsa had once asked him. Can the soul truly exist independently? Could it be that today I will finally hear the answer? Penny, seemingly unaware of Saul's strange reaction, continued excitedly sharing her discovery. The fundamental logic of our world appears to be the union of consciousness and body. Even if consciousness can temporarily leave the body, it can never sever its connection. That is why no one has ever achieved independent existence as a consciousness. No matter how close they get to success, they always quickly die from contamination. Listening to Penny's words, Saul began to ponder. If a consciousness cannot exist independently, then what about the consciousnesses inside the diary? It must be that with the diary as their vessel, they do not count as fully independent beings. And then there was Lady Yura. Though she was a soul body too, according to Kanksha, her silhouette was also a form of body. Even so, Gorsa still needed to create a more stable vessel for her to survive. Penny understood that Saul needed some time to think after hearing her words, so she did not immediately speak again. Several minutes passed before Penny continued, Brother Saul, please place Seam onto the tapestry. Seam? Saul instinctively touched his wrist. You want me to use Seam to observe the elven world? Seam was a very peculiar curse. It had no offensive or defensive power, only the ability to hide oneself or to spy on a scene of endless sunshine and grassy fields. The hiding function was useful, but the spying ability had always seemed pointless. No matter when or where Saul looked into Seam, All he ever saw was the same scene of sunshine and grass. Yet today, Penny was asking him to use Seem to observe the elven world. Could this really be a coincidence? Penny, how do you know that Seem can observe the elven world? Because the seed of evil thought grew into Seem through the joint effort of me and the whisper of the elves. Penny's voice grew cautious, as if fearing Saul would be angry. Although Saul had not expected Penny to be hiding something like this, he felt more surprised than angry. At that time, the whisper of the elves was withering away, and you were still a sealed egg. How did you manage to modify Seem? Back then I was indeed in a state without inherited consciousness, but I still had instinct. You yourself were affected by my instincts before. Yeah, dreaming about dead wizard apprentices all the time, it almost made me think I was sleepwalking and killing people. Saul could not help but grumble. Penny's voice carried a hint of apology. Well, in any case, it was mainly the whisper of the elves leading the process, because it wanted you to see the plight of the elves. Maybe it hoped to gain your help. Seek my help, asking a third-rank wizard apprentice to save a race that once had fourth-rank members. Are the elves insane? Well, they are insane now. Nowadays, anything related to elves is inevitably tinged with madness. Saying the elves had gone insane was not an exaggeration. I understand, Brother Saul. The elves have become synonymous with madness, but you don't have to be afraid you have. Penny was referring to the diary. But Saul shook his head. If the diary would truly help him unconditionally, he would not even fear provoking fourth-rank wizards. But it did not. The more Saul grew, the more he could feel the overwhelming power within the diary. Yet that power refused to transform into actual combat strength. It merely served as a guidepost. What to do still depended on Saul's own choices. Which path to take still depended on Saul's own steps. They are coming. Brother Saul, please take a look yourself. After seeing it, you will be able to make better choices. Saul did not hesitate. He directly tore the curse from his wrist and slapped it onto the tapestry on the back of the pure white throne with a crisp snap. From here, right? Yes. Penny had not expected Saul to act so decisively. Even she was momentarily stunned. The diary is not giving any warning, so it should be safe. Besides, I do want to know why the elves' contamination is so strong. Saul took a deep breath, placed both hands on either side of Seem, and leaned closer, bringing his left eye up to the gap. The world inside the Seem was no longer a field of sunshine and grass. He saw a bizarre and colorful world. He seemed to perceive colors beyond his understanding. Those colors twisted and shifted, never once staying still. Bright red one moment, deep blue the next. Saul thought he was looking at an image, but in the next moment it became nothing but flowing lines. The world inside the Seem did not seem to exist in material form. All the shifting colors changed without any pattern. Just as Saul was wondering what knowledge he could possibly gain from this chaos of colors, he suddenly spotted several white silhouettes in the distance, though it was impossible to tell how far away they were. Those silhouettes definitely did not resemble human figures, nor did they look like any animals. They were more like random imaginings, like a child's careless doodles. Yet they were moving toward Saul, struggling as though swimming against a current, but steadily drawing closer. In the blink of an eye, the white figures disappeared. In the next, they were right in front of him. So this is a world where only consciousness exists, Saul thought to himself. At that moment, he received a signal. Not through sight, not through hearing, not through smell, not through taste. It was a signal that abruptly appeared in his mind. I want to go back. Chapter 385, Modification. I want to go back. It was just a single thought that appeared out of nowhere in Saul's mind, and quickly became a deeply rooted obsession. Saul's left eye instantly turned blood red. At the same time, the puppet doll hanging from his waist had its eyes flash from red to black, black so thick, so deep, and then with a crack it shattered into powder. Inside Saul's mental realm, four figures suddenly appeared on the originally empty platform. They looked at each other in horror, not understanding how they could have appeared when Saul hadn't entered yet. But even more terrifying was that the starry sky around them began to repeat endlessly. "I want to go back, I want to go back, I want to go back." Herman cried out in fear, "What's going on?" Morden shouted angrily, "Someone is trying to influence the master's mind." Agu narrowed his eyes. "It's not just influence, something is modifying the master's mind." The word modifying immediately made them tense up. Modification meant erasure and addition, but what had been erased and what had been added, the four mental projections had no idea. Just then, the diary floating above them lazily flipped a page. The sound was loud enough to startle all the projections. All four figures looked up in unison, terror flashing across their eyes. Compared to the terror they now felt, their earlier unease was nothing. Meanwhile, in the outside world, Saul, relying on his strong willpower, pushed himself away from the gap, forcing his eyes away from it. There was now a dark red mark at the corner of his left eye, which would take a few days to fade. At that moment, a streak of silver detached from the woven painting and nervously flew onto Saul's shoulder. "Master, master, are you all right?" Penny's wings were trembling uncontrollably. She was terrified. The nightmare butterfly had entered this purely spiritual elf world twice before, but had never encountered any attacks. The soul's consciousnesses were always chaotic and disordered, lacking self-awareness or thought. Their development and extinction were matters of mere impulse. But she hadn't expected that once her master's gaze entered this world, the chaotic souls would actively attack him. Yes, in Penny's eyes, the act of projecting information at her master was an attack. Because this projection was domineering, it allowed no resistance. If the master lacked defensive abilities, he would instantly accept that projected information, believing it to be part of his natural thoughts. Such modifications was terrifying. It amounted to rewriting a person's understanding of their own past. If the projected information contradicted reality, it could even completely erase someone's sense of self. Even Penny couldn't repair that kind of cognitive damage, because she believed she could only observe history, not change it. "Master, are you feeling unwell anywhere?" Penny asked cautiously. She was practically in tears, terrified that her master might suddenly lift his head and ask, "Who are you?" Even worse, she had no way of telling which parts of Saul's memories might have been altered. The tampered memories might only reveal themselves at a critical moment. And that could bring about devastating consequences. Saul turned his head, smiled faintly, and flicked Penny with his finger. Surprisingly, he actually managed to physically touch the nightmare butterfly this time, sending her flipping through the air. "Eh?" Penny cried out in shock, spinning midair. "Master, how can you touch me now?" "You'd better return to the diary for now." Without giving her a chance to argue, Saul tucked her back into the diary. She turned into a silver hollow bookmark, quietly slipping between the pages. Puh! The diary closed with a crisp sound, and a few wisps of smoky dust escaped the pages, only to be swallowed up by the starry darkness. Watching this, Saul sighed helplessly. This nightmare butterfly, not even realizing she herself was influenced, still worried about me. Indeed, for a moment earlier, he had been invaded by strange consciousnesses. But because those invaders dug too deep, they ended up intruding into the domain of a true powerhouse, the diary, who simply slapped them back with a turn of its page. Thus, Saul easily regained his clarity. Moreover, amid the chaotic foreign thoughts, he managed to extract some truly valuable information. The Elf King, when he saw the sinkhole, He must have detected some profound, hidden information that I couldn't. So, he conceived the idea of abandoning the material world entirely and creating a purely spiritual realm. And because the elves, while not very advanced in magical ranks, had extraordinary mental talents, they actually succeeded. The principle behind it is somewhat similar to my own mental platform, but far more complex and complete. Even though I only obtained a fragment of the knowledge, it's enough for me to upgrade both my mental platform and mental battlefield again. Right now, dragging people into my mental battlefield is still a bit too abrupt, ineffective against those with stable mental forms and strong wills. But if I could build it into a small, self-contained world like the elves did, I could gradually draw people into it, without triggering strong resistance. No wonder the diary didn't stop me. It's like robbing the robbers. At this moment, Saul still had his hand resting on the pure white throne, and the black and white star behind him continued to rotate slowly. But that's just a bonus. The truly important knowledge is about the elves themselves. They created a new world and seemingly angered our world, or maybe I should call it our planet. Saul wasn't sure if that was the most accurate description, but it was the most vivid. It was as if the world itself had a consciousness. When it discovered someone had dared to open up a new territory on its land, it became enraged and kicked the entire group into the new territory, without caring whether it could support them. Then it locked the door from the outside. This resulted in the trapped souls being subjected to immense and endless compression, turning into a chaotic, fused mass. Colorful and dazzling on the surface, but in truth completely chaotic and disordered. For elves who prided themselves on their mental prowess, this was the most terrifying punishment imaginable. At the same time, the world's consciousness obliterated the elves' physical bodies. In Saul's eyes, it was as if the world was sulking. Didn't you want to abandon your bodies? Fine, I'll destroy them for you. Thus, when the elves lured Saul here, they urgently projected the thought, we want to go back. But just a single thought isn't enough. They must have made other preparations. Saul lowered his head. Earlier, when observing the world, he had placed the elf king's head at his feet. Now he once again picked it up. According to Penny, he was supposed to return the head to the pure white throne, which would mean giving back the elves' treasure. But now he doesn't feel like doing that anymore. However, I can't take it out either. Bringing it outside would fulfill the black space's wish. Placing it on the throne would fulfill the white space's wish. Thinking about it, neither sounds like a good idea. Although Saul did sympathize with the elves' tragedy, they probably hadn't expected that a mere act of innovation would destroy their entire race. He was even more aware that these souls, compressed to an extreme and thoroughly distorted, were now terrifyingly strange. If they were ever released, what emerged would not be the beautiful elves of old, but something entirely new. Their attempt just now to modify Saul's mind was proof enough of how corrupted they had become, capable of easily erasing a person's thoughts and memories. Moreover, to survive in the material world again, they would definitely need vessels. And what could be a better vessel than a human? Among humans, wizards would be their prime targets. I can't bring it out, but I can't just leave it here either. After all, the Elf Valley isn't truly isolated. Saul's fingertips tapped rapidly on the Elf King's head, making soft thud-thud-thud sounds. I don't have the strength to destroy it yet. Where should I hide it? Give it to me. A voice suddenly spoke up from behind Saul. Startled, Saul immediately turned around and saw a figure standing at the end of the red carpet in the room. Who are you? Saul demanded harshly, though it was difficult. The figure before him was so breathtakingly beautiful that merely maintaining a stern expression was already an effort. The newcomer, expressionless, replied, "You can call me half-elf. Any other name will just be blurred out." Behind the half-elf, snowflakes drifted in through the open door, as if this stunning figure had brought winter itself. Chapter 386, Gift. Half-elf, Saul refused with difficulty. I can't give it to you. The consciousness in the black space had once instructed Saul to take Concha out and hand her over to a half-elf, but he hadn't expected the half-elf to enter the valley himself. You don't have to worry. I will take care of it. Unlike you ordinary people, once I entered the valley, I could never leave again. Saul froze for a moment, but, thinking carefully, realized it was indeed the case. From the information he had just obtained, this elven valley was like a filter, the outermost lock imprisoning the elves. Wizards could still struggle to squeeze through the mesh, but elves were truly trapped once they entered, no way out. Even though the one before him was a half-elf, unless he could somehow shed half of his elven blood, he would spend the rest of his life stuck here. But even so, Saul couldn't just hand over the Elven King's head to him. The half-elf clearly understood Saul's concerns. After thinking for a moment, he said, If I told you I wanted to destroy it, you probably still wouldn't trust me easily, right? How about this? You hold on to it. I can destroy it without ever touching it. After it's destroyed, the remains will be yours to handle however you want, including taking them out of the valley. And how can I be sure you really destroyed it? The half-elf wasn't angered by Saul's repeated questioning. Some things are like the sun. Even if the sky is covered in clouds, you still know it's there behind them. Saul lowered his eyes to look at the head in his hands. Strangely enough, the Elven King wasn't even as good-looking as this half-elf. Is it true that mixing bloodlines creates miracles? Can I ask why you want to destroy it? Didn't you want to destroy it just a moment ago too? The half-elf took a few steps closer to Saul, but stopped voluntarily about 3 meters away. This distance is enough, he said, as the snowflakes drifting around him grew denser. Since you wanted to destroy it, you must already understand its danger, right? Even though life is hard, I truly love this world, and the return of the elves would bring irreversible pollution to it. Moreover, the half-elf hesitated slightly before continuing, the world is bound for destruction. Saul looked at the half-elf with a serious expression. What was the part he just omitted? Could it be about the sinkhole? Although it's our first meeting, I choose to trust you. Saul straightened his arm and placed the Elven King's head down on the carpet in front of them. Go ahead. Seeing Saul so straightforward, the half-elf was momentarily stunned. Regaining his senses, he asked Saul, Are you Saul? How do you know my name? When I came in, Gorsa told me to make sure I got you out before I died, the half-elf said, clapping his hands lightly. On my way in, I met a wizard apprentice. I asked if he was Saul. He said yes, so I sent him out. Saul immediately realized it must have been Mark who had escaped. He hadn't expected that. Despite killing Monroe and Herman along the way, Mark had been lucky enough to get out early thanks to the half-elf. Saul smiled faintly. Master Gorsa still cares about me after all. Seeing Saul's slightly cold smile, the half-elf added quietly, Some things may look a certain way, but they're not always what you think. Saul withdrew his smile. For some reason, in front of this half-elf, he had revealed his real emotions. That's true, Saul said calmly. But even understanding that, there are so many twists and turns in interpretation that, in the end, you still know nothing for sure. The half-elf said nothing more. He raised his hands, and his 10 fingers turned into shimmering streams of colorful light. Then he beckoned toward the Elven King's head, lying on the carpet. A colorful thread of light was pulled out of the head, drawn by invisible forces. Saul watched silently without interrupting. He could tell that, as the colorful thread was gradually extracted, the once beautiful face of the head began to change. It shifted from the black-haired female appearance that fit Saul's aesthetics to a silver-haired, androgynous beauty. Still beautiful, but the features and contours were entirely different from before. The colorful thread continued to extend into the half-elf's hand. More and more threads were pulled out, and the beautiful head underwent further transformations. It began to shrivel, wither, and lose all vitality. Finally, as the last bit of colorful thread left the head and entered the half-elf's hand, the head completely dimmed. It was dead. Saul could feel this clearly. Meanwhile, the half-elf holding the thread began to be covered in thick frost. The color in his body also began to recede, concentrating into his palm. Saul opened his mouth slightly in shock. He watched as the half-elf's appearance lost all its color and beauty, turning into a pale humanoid figure. He looked eerily similar to those bizarre, humanoid creatures in the forest. But he didn't have that unreal, ghostly feeling. He was real. Maybe this was the blessing of his half-human bloodline. Finally, all the color condensed at the tip of his finger, forming a constantly shifting, colorful sphere. "You can take the head away now," the half-elf said. "Although it no longer has the support of spiritual power, it's still excellent wizardry material, highly adaptable for various modifications." Saul bent down and lightly touched the shriveled head with his fingertip, easily stowing it into his compressed satchel. "Thank you." The half-elf nodded, accepting Saul's thanks. Then, holding the colorful sphere, he walked step by step toward the pure white throne. Saul moved aside automatically, a strange sadness rising in his heart. The diary didn't sound any warnings, which meant the half-elf really was walking calmly toward death. The half-elf reached the throne and knelt on one knee. He paused slightly, but ultimately, slowly and steadily, offered the colorful sphere to the woven tapestry on the throne. In the next instant, the seemingly ordinary tapestry generated a strong suction force, absorbing the entire colorful sphere. Then the half-elf collapsed powerlessly at the foot of the throne. The frost covering his body began to melt away. The snow drifting in the room also began to dissipate. It was as if the miraculous power was crumbling. Everything returned to normal. Everything fell silent. He turned his head to look at Saul, and finally showed the first smile since they had met. "Good, at least with the throne's power I can still send you out. Otherwise, I would have broken my promise." Seeing the half-elf struggling to climb onto the throne, Saul stepped forward, wanting to help him up, but was stopped by the half-elf shaking his head. "Is it my eye you have with you?" Saul thought of the Eye of Banishment he had just obtained and nodded. The half-elf, now seated weakly on the throne, seemed to regain a bit of strength for a moment. He looked solemnly at Saul and said, "The Forest of Seasons was only one of the elves' settlements. There were elves living in other places too. No matter when, no matter where, never respond to the requests of elves." Saul nodded, "I understand." The half-elf closed his eyes. "All right. Now I'll send you out and give you everything I have left." The next second, countless snowflakes surged up under Saul's feet, completely blocking his vision. In the final moment before his sight was obscured, Saul saw the half-elf's pale body rapidly rotting away. When the snowflakes dispersed, Saul found himself standing again in the forest where he had first met Mark. He hadn't managed to bring back the 4 vessels he had lost in the Elven Valley, but this journey had yielded great rewards. Because as he was leaving the valley, he realized what the half-elf had truly given him. The half-elf had transferred all the pure magic power remaining in his body to Saul. Saul had no idea how he managed it. After all, in this world, magic wasn't like internal energy that could simply be passed around. Now, Saul's magic reserves were already very close to the minimum requirement for a true wizard. All he needed to do next was quietly study for a year or two, and he could officially advance to become a true wizard. Saul looked back into the depths of the forest. "Thank you, half-elf, who never even had a name." Chapter 387, A new plan. Woo's woo. The sound of crying echoed in Saul's mind. As he was walking out of the forest, Saul said helplessly, "Penny, why are you crying again?" "Woo, I almost got Master into trouble." Saul tried comforting her for a few sentences, but it was useless, so he simply changed the subject. "Didn't you say you were searching for the meaning of your existence? So, did you find it?" Unexpectedly, Penny cried even louder. "I thought I found it, but it turns out my perception was tampered with. Woo, woo, wah." Saul was covered in black lines. Although Penny always had a little girl's voice, she had never been this emotional before. It was probably a side effect of her tampered perception. Maybe only time could heal her. "But why are you searching for the meaning of your existence anyway? Are you confused about something?" Saul asked curiously, partly to pull himself out of his earlier gloom. "Woo, Brother Saul, did you know? Nightmare butterflies are not natural creatures. We were actually created by a wizard." "What?" Saul was startled. "Nightmare butterflies who can observe history are creations of a wizard." Thankfully, he'd absorbed a lot of knowledge recently and quickly calmed down. "What about the wizard who created you?" "He went insane." Okay then. Was he very powerful?" "I only know that before I left him, he had been a fourth-rank wizard for quite a while." "A fourth-rank wizard could create creatures that exist between consciousness and reality, able to observe history and enter dreams." "Brother Saul, there's a big difference between wizards and wizard apprentices. The power gap between each wizard rank is huge." Penny then explained what she knew about the differences between the ranks of wizards. Apprentices could only attack point to point, but true wizards could launch area attacks. This was because they could already influence the flow of magic in a certain area. Moreover, their spell attacks could carry certain attributes from their locator devices. In other words, locator devices were no longer purely defensive, but they could now play a role in offense. By the second rank, wizards could compress their own magic and mental power, allowing them to store much greater amounts of energy. They also gained greater resilience, which helped them resist corruption and endure the strain caused by unleashing power. Third-rank wizards were even scarier. They could turn their locator devices into converters, capable of harnessing external power. Thus, a single strike from a third-rank wizard could destroy an entire city. As for the fourth rank, Penny didn't explain. She said her understanding might be wrong, and if she said something inaccurate, it could corrupt Saul's mind. It seemed she felt guilty about today's mistakes. Otherwise, she wouldn't be so proactive in teaching Saul knowledge. "And what about you, Penny? What was your peak strength?" Around second rank, I guess. But there were some third-rank nightmare butterflies too, just not in the Western continent. Not even fully second rank. No wonder she got chased around by Kismet like a rat. As they talked, they had already exited the forest. Their carriage still stood quietly outside, the horses even nibbling at a fresh pile of grass nearby. When Saul approached the carriage, several black tendrils suddenly burst out from the ground, bouncing toward him. But when they tried to merge into the back of his neck, they were blocked as if hitting a pane of glass. The tendrils wobbled on the ground pitifully, so Saul had no choice but to scoop them all up. "Little Algie hasn't woken up yet, so you guys will have to wait outside for now." As Saul got closer to the carriage, one of the tendrils suddenly opened a mouth and bit at the hem of his robe. Saul paused, a thoughtful look flashing through his eyes. After adjusting his emotions, he stepped forward and opened the carriage door. Inside the carriage, Gorsa, wrapped in a reddish-brown cloak and covered entirely in pink bandages, raised a hand also wrapped in bandages and greeted Saul. "You're back." Saul immediately bowed his head in greeting. "Master." His words cut off because he spotted something next to Gorsa's hand. A severed head. Mark's head. Mark's eyes were bulging wide, his mouth slightly open, completely unprepared for death. Saul's heart thudded violently twice. He suppressed his breathing and slowly looked up at Gorsa. Gorsa's eyes were still curved in that smiling expression. He impersonated you and tried to use the half-elf to escape. That might have cut off your future path, so I killed him to vent your anger. Saul's mouth opened wide, screaming internally, "Whose anger exactly?" Seeing Saul believe it, Gorsa's smile deepened. "Just kidding." He lightly patted Mark's bloodless head. This guy consumed too much veiled crystal essence and began to mutate. If we let him live, he would have kept breeding more veiled crystal essence users. That would be bad for the Wizard Tower's development. Gorsa's silver eyes swept over Saul, a hint of interest flashing in them. "How many did you eat?" Saul quickly shook his head. "None." "Good child." Gorsa's eyes curved into an even bigger smile. "I figured you wouldn't need it anyway. Come on, get in. I'll take you back and tell you about the new developments in Kaz and Rum's resurrection experiments. It's quite delightful news." Saul didn't dare delay and hurriedly climbed into the carriage. He was about to ask about driving the carriage when Gorsa casually tossed a magic scroll outside. The scroll transformed into a faceless humanoid figure. After bowing politely to Gorsa and Saul, it climbed into the driver's seat, flicked the reins, and the carriage started moving. Saul closed the carriage door, and the sounds outside immediately grew faint. He glanced at the severed head being used as Gorsa's armrest, then quickly shifted his gaze elsewhere. After a moment of silence, Gorsa finally spoke. Kaz and Rum discovered a new dark attribute material. They named it Blue Water Soul. Blue Water Soul? Saul asked in surprise. Was it found in Bluewater Bay? Gorsa smiled. So you've been there too. It's quite a rare material, though sadly it's piled up from human deaths. The soul tides at Bluewater Bay were indeed dangerous for ordinary people, and the soul fragments inside were very unusual. Saul and Byron had studied them before but couldn't find their origin. Gorsa reached into his cloak and pulled out a transparent orb from between the bandages. Inside the orb, a misty, cloud-like substance floated gently. This is a semi-finished product. Rum found a material that can reduce the toxicity of Blue Water Soul, which in turn enhances soul strength. Meanwhile, Guido has developed a toxin that can paralyze both body and soul, creating an adhesive effect between them. In short, if this experiment succeeds, we can create a vessel for Yura that will last 10 years without triggering mutation. Following this line of research, it's estimated we can eventually extend it to 50 years. Saul listened intently. This approach was somewhat similar to his own thinking, though the focus was different. Both aimed to extend the time a soul could stay in a vessel, to reduce the frequency of body switches, and minimize soul-body pollution. As Saul was still pondering the new plan, Gorsa looked over at him. His silver eyes were particularly striking in the dim carriage. "That's good too. This way I won't have to risk activating the backup plan. After all, the backup plan has only been in research for a few years. It's still quite unstable." Saul suddenly felt a chill sweep down his spine, as if something icy had brushed along his back. Chapter 388, The Overlooked Genius. Gorsa's mention of a backup plan instantly put Saul on high alert, but it seemed the other had no intention of explaining it in detail. He toyed with the Blue Water Soul in his hand, making the little sphere bounce between his fingers like a plaything. "Did you see the elves?" He suddenly changed the subject. Saul's voice was still stiff from the lingering chill. "I don't know if what I saw counts as an elf." Gorsa said, "If we go by the original classification of species, then no, it wouldn't count. But since there are no pure-blooded elves left in this world, calling them the new elves is fine too." He lowered his head slightly. as if looking at his own hand, or perhaps seeing through the hand wrapped in pink bandages, gazing at something beyond. That question was asked for us a long time ago. As it turns out, the soul really cannot exist independently, completely separated from the body. Saul stayed silent, though he felt a bit strange. You know what happened to the elves? Hadn't he said before that he didn't know? The half-elf mentioned it briefly before he entered, and the rest I guessed, Gorsa said, winking at Saul. My guess is, elves, naturally gifted with strong mental power, decided to abandon their physical bodies for some reason. They created a backyard for themselves to do this. Unfortunately, their exploration angered some fundamental rules of existence, and they were imprisoned inside their own creation. What should have been a sanctuary became a deep abyss. I'm guessing, am I right? Gorsa was now asking Saul. Saul, too, was interested in comparing notes to see if his thoughts aligned. The elves, after seeing a giant sinkhole on the world's underside, decided to abandon their physical forms and escape into a world composed entirely of consciousness. That's my guess based on what I witnessed in the valley. Unexpectedly, Gorsa's brow began to furrow bit by bit. Specifically, the bandages between his brows wrinkled. The world's underside, a sinkhole, Gorsa sank into thought. From his expression, it was as if this was his first time hearing about this sinkhole. Wasn't the Tower Master supposedly from a powerful wizard family on another continent? Why didn't he know about the world's sinkhole either? Could it be because of that, Gorsa muttered to himself. When he noticed Saul's puzzled look, he quickly pulled himself together and didn't continue sharing his thoughts about the sinkhole. In that case, our bodies are actually natural locators. They're not as powerful as the ones we later craft for ourselves, but they're safe and stable. Pity that so many people only see them as burdens. Gorsa leaned back, comfortably sinking into the soft cushions, with his elbow casually resting on Mark's head. Saul, the fact that you were able to complete 2 body modifications without harming yourself is quite impressive. Faced with the Tower Master's praise, Saul could only bow his head and accept it, feeling a little guilty. Unlike Senior Byron, his modifications were mostly achieved with external help. In Saul's view, Senior Byron, who had transformed his body into a locator through sheer effort, was the real genius. It was only because of the extensive modifications that Byron was approaching 30, before he finally advanced to 3rd-rank apprentice. He must praise Byron properly when he got back. While lost in these thoughts, Saul suddenly noticed the red-eyed puppet hanging from his belt. Both of the puppet's eyes were now hollow sockets. Only then did Saul remember that when he was observing the elves' world, the puppet's eyes had seemingly shattered. He quickly took the puppet off his waist and handed it to Gorsa. Master, the puppet's eyes broke. Would he have to compensate for it? Saul cautiously added, It seems the elves tried to influence my mind, and the puppet blocked part of the mental attack. Actually, most of it was blocked by the diary. But since Gorsa wouldn't know exactly how powerful the mental attack had been, it was better to attribute most of the credit to the puppet. Unexpectedly, when Gorsa saw the puppet, he revealed an expression that was both amused and helpless. Don't ask Saul how he could tell. Aya, it's really thoroughly broken. Whoever left a mental mark on it is going to suffer. Mental mark, Saul repeated. Judging from Gorsa's tone, it was obvious that the person who left the mark wasn't him. It was Yura's, Gorsa immediately revealed. She's very good at detecting malicious mental attacks, and this puppet was made using her abilities. After a brief pause, he added, It's fine. I sent her back to the Wizard Tower yesterday. Inside the tower, she'll be safe. 1 hour earlier, in the Wizard Tower. You found the blue water soul too, I heard from Kaz. In the dimly lit room, Mentor Rum sat in a corner, looking at Byron, who was stepping into his room for the first time. Byron stood about 5 meters away from Rum's head, keeping his gaze lowered, careful not to let the meat sludge at his feet touch his shoes. Oh. Feeling that a one-word answer was too curt, Byron opened a mouth on his throat and said, "I named it Gray Matter." Hesh, Rum couldn't help but chuckle. Kaz must have complained about how ugly that name is, right? Byron actually thought Gray Matter sounded much better than Blue Water Soul, but he wasn't stupid, only blunt. Oh. Rum chuckled again. Nowadays, even when he laughed, his fat no longer wobbled. Like the deepest ocean, the currents beneath the surface didn't disturb the calm above. Of course, discovering it isn't the main point. What really impressed me was the potion formula you submitted. The thinking behind it is quite interesting, and judging by your current condition, it has already been tested, hasn't it? Byron nodded, but didn't ask how the potion formula he had submitted to Mentor Kaz for exchange had ended up in Rum's hands. "Tell me your application ideas." Byron didn't answer immediately. Rum wasn't angry, simply smiling as he said, "It won't be for free. As long as your ideas hold up when the Tower Master returns, I'll recommend you to join the resurrection experiment. Then, any materials you want will just be a word away." Byron's eyes lit up. "Is Saul part of this experiment too?" Rum nodded. "Yes. If you want to join this project led by the Tower Master, then show me your knowledge properly." Encouraged, Byron reached into his mouth and pulled out a thick notebook from under his skin. This notebook was much thicker than the one he had once given Saul. It recorded his detailed experiments and hypotheses about gray matter. What Saul had was just an edited highlight version. As Byron was about to begin his presentation, a dense black shadow slipped in through the gap under Rum's door. Yura never knocked. Rum tilted his head, his face half buried in fat, revealing a smile. "Hold on, we have a guest." The black silhouette, like a paper cutout, slowly approached. "I heard someone else found the Blue Water Soul." "Yes, it seems we overlooked a genius," Rum said, pointing at Byron. Then he introduced, "This is the subject of our resurrection experiment and the Tower Master's wife. You may call her Lady Yura." Byron, expressionless, bowed to Yura. Yura tilted her head slightly, her face unreadable. "Wonderful." She casually hopped onto a lab bench, swinging her legs like a little girl. "This experiment is very important to Gorsa. I expect official testing to begin within 6 months, Yura said as she dug around on Rum's lab bench, finally fishing out a transparent marble filled with swirling mist. "Let me audit your ideas. Any new insights?" She tossed the Blue Water Soul up and down. Looking at the sphere in Lady Yura's hand, Byron thought for a moment, then pulled a small pouch from his pocket. "This is the original state of the Blue Water Soul. I call it gray matter. This better matches the content of my report." With that, he took out 2 pieces of gray matter from the pouch and handed one each to Lady Yura and Mentor Rum. Chapter 389, split in 2. "Therefore, I discovered that the gray matter does have a strengthening effect on the soul. However, I haven't yet figured out the exact composition of the gray matter, but it can be filtered to remove the harmful substances that have been identified." Byron was explaining his theory and experimental results to the two of them. Of course, he didn't reveal too many details. Those would require academic credits to be exchanged for. Yes, even mentors couldn't freeload. However, Yura and Rum were both very powerful wizards. Even though Byron only shared a surface-level explanation, they could already deduce the underlying principles and its validity. But Byron hesitated for a moment and still voiced one of his concerns. "After consuming a potion made from gray matter, I seem to have discovered a hidden danger, though I'm not yet sure how severe it is." Yura and Rum exchanged a glance, clearly becoming even more interested in Byron's research. What hidden danger? Yura had just asked with interest when she suddenly cried out in pain. Lady Yura. Rum immediately looked over with concern, reaching out with his 3 long arms to check on Yura's condition. However, the pain didn't stop. Yura's scream grew even more anguished, to the point where her form began to destabilize. The edges of her black silhouette started dripping like wax, oozing thick, sticky liquid. Rum immediately stopped approaching and barked sharply. Your soul body is under attack. Calm yourself quickly. Yura, experienced as she was, swiftly crushed a blue water soul in her left hand. A plume of faintly glowing white mist floated out and drifted into Yura's head. Byron, standing to the side, was momentarily stunned. He hadn't expected the blue water soul to be used like that. He couldn't help but wonder about the principles and components behind that mist. Yura's condition visibly improved, though her silhouette's edges remained blurry. Her consciousness seemed slightly muddled. She lifted her right hand and crushed the piece of gray matter Byron had given her. And then, the same faintly glowing mist emerged, exactly like the one from the water soul. This time, Byron lowered his head, retracting his gaze, and forced himself to empty his mind. After absorbing the gray matter's mist, Yura's state improved once again. At least now, her shadow resembled the silhouette of a beautiful woman. Seeing this, Rum let out a breath of relief and turned to look at Byron. At the same time, Yura, now stabilized, also turned her head toward Byron. In the darkness, it seemed as if she revealed a pair of emotionless eyes. The room suddenly fell into a terrifying silence. Just as Byron, under their intense gaze, began feeling physical stress symptoms, Rum finally spoke. You may leave for now. When the Tower Master returns, I will report your research results to him. Whether or not you can participate in the resurrection experiments ultimately depends on the Tower Master's approval. Understood. Byron nodded quietly and obediently left. After stepping out of Rum's room and gently closing the sliding door behind him, Byron's footsteps grew heavy for a moment. But he quickly regained his rhythm, walking away with a calm face. He kept this composure all the way back to his dormitory, closed the door, crossed the cluttered room, sat down at his desk, and slowly pulled both hands out from his sleeves, placing them on the table. His hands were trembling lightly. Anyone else witnessing Yura absorbing both the blue weight soul and the gray matter might have only found it strange. But Byron was different. He had spent nearly half a year researching gray matter. The way Yura used the gray matter and the blue water soul, there was no difference. Most importantly, Byron suddenly realized what that mysterious mist was. It was an extremely terrifying form of evil thought, something that could drive an ordinary person's soul insane instantly. He finally understood the hidden danger he had been unable to pinpoint all along. But back in Rum's room, he hadn't dared to reveal anything. Because the way those two had acted, so practiced and so knowing, had terrified him. A substance that harbored extreme hidden evil thoughts at its core. Could it really serve as a stable agent to reinforce the soul and bind the body and soul together? Wouldn't it pose a terrible danger? A headache like a danger alarm kept throbbing in Byron's mind, making him desperately want to flee from those two strange people. After calming himself for a moment, Byron rummaged through his materials, pulling out paper and a pen. He began writing rapidly. The feather pen left messy traces across the slightly yellowed parchment, but the content recorded was a series of complex three-dimensional coordinates. Tusk. You're really sharp, huh? Suddenly, a woman's voice sounded behind Byron. His hand froze mid-writing. He slowly raised his head, his gaze shifting to the side and behind him, only to see Yura perched on the back of his chair, a black silhouette without a visible head, only a neck stretching over a meter long. From his angle, it seemed that the end of her elongated neck, and thus her head, was right above his own. "Lady Yura," Byron stammered. The black head slowly slid from above his head down to his ear, the voice accompanied by an icy breath entering directly into his ear. "Even though I don't know what you're writing, as soon as you come back and start scribbling all these strange things, you're trying to transmit information, aren't you?" Byron was thankful that his skin hid most signs of fear. So he did his best to steady himself and replied as casually as possible. "I just suddenly thought of a problem that needed to be." Whoosh! Byron's words were abruptly cut off. He seemed to see something suddenly drill between his eyes. Then he saw Yura, now sitting on the table in front of him. He stared blankly at her slender, paper-thin figure, unable to utter another word. Yura, sitting casually on Byron's long desk, softly sighed. "What a pity. Since Billy refused to come forward and you've learned too much, the formula for modifying the blue water soul can't be leaked through your mouth." She stretched out her hand and gently stroked Byron's outline. "In the tower, it's hard to find someone as honest as you." She withdrew her hand. A strange sound echoed from Byron's body. It was a mix of the sound of peeling old wall plaster and fraying rope snapping. Before Yura's eyes, Byron's body slowly split into two halves. The cut was black, smooth like a mirror. Yet at the same time it was soft, like supple leather. Byron's two halves slid slowly off the sides of the chair, falling to the ground. "Humtilda," Yura lifted her hand to her own face and gently stroked her outline, savoring the scene with great pleasure. Knock, knock, knock. Someone knocked on the door. Yura chuckled softly, hopped down from the long table and cheerfully walked to the door, reaching out to open it. Outside, Locke stood there with a smiling face. "Senior Byron, I have a few questions I'd like to ask you." Byron's voice came from within Yura's black shadow. Receiving permission, Locke stepped inside Byron's dormitory and closed the door behind him. He approached the long desk and, without surprise, noticed Byron's body split into two halves. He merely gave it a glance before shifting his focus to the desk. These symbols must be something Saul invented. Yura approached and asked, "Can you read it?" "I can't, Locke giggled happily. "But it doesn't matter as long as the intended recipient can't see it either." He picked up the sheet of paper and used a simple fire spell to quickly reduce it to ashes. Afterward, he glanced down at Byron's desk and laughed again. He. Yura tilted her head, looking at him. "What are you laughing at?" Byron wrote so hard the writing was imprinted onto the desk. Saying this, Locke gently brushed his hand across the surface. The once smooth desk immediately became rough and uneven, pitted with marks. Chapter 390, Almost There. Gorsa did not use teleportation to return directly to the Wizard Tower. Saul suspected it was because they were too far from the tower, beyond the maximum teleportation distance. As for why Gorsa didn't teleport part by part back home, Saul figured it was either because Gorsa's physical state couldn't support multiple long-distance teleports, or he was just being lazy. Although high-level spells looked impressive, the burden on the mental body was much greater. Thus, it was rare to see anyone casually using spells in daily life within the Wizard Tower. Simply refraining from using mental power was already considered resting for apprentices. Along the way, the two of them didn't converse much. Although Gorsa was already Saul's master, he didn't seem interested in giving Saul lessons. He didn't even ask much about what had happened in the Elven Valley or who had died there. Most of the time, Gorsa sat leaning against the wall with his eyes closed like a mummy, resting. Meanwhile, the head he kept beside him continued to shrink, shrink, and shrink again over the 3 days and nights. In the end, it became only the size of a walnut. Its surface even looked somewhat like a walnut. But its color was not the same. It was a scorched black with hints of dark red. Once Mark's head had shriveled into that state, Gorsa put it away. He had no intention of explaining anything to Saul. At first, Saul remained tense, but over time he had no choice but to start absorbing and digesting the magic gifted by the half-elf. Otherwise, he constantly felt as if he might burst. When Gorsa closed his eyes to rest, Saul also closed his, but his mind wasn't resting at all. He was awkwardly controlling the immense magic within him, slowly fusing it into his skin and organs. If the magic given by the elf hadn't been so pure, entirely free of the half-elf's mental contamination, Saul would never have dared to assimilate it so recklessly. By the time the spire of the wizard tower appeared on the horizon, Saul had finally managed to roughly stabilize the excess magic. The magic given by the half-elf had been evenly distributed throughout his body. The next task was to fully merge it with his own power and ensure it was entirely obedient to his mental command. Then he would apply to learn a third-rank spell, using his understanding of power and practical experience to help himself truly step into the ranks of a true wizard. However, the rapid growth of his magic and mental power made Saul's elemental affinity seem comparatively too weak. If he rushed his advancement without addressing this flaw, it would result in an unstable foundation. Luckily, Saul currently had many ways to enhance his elemental perception. Thinking it over, Saul took out the gray matter notes that Senior Byron had given him from his compressed satchel. The potion Byron had developed could not only strengthen soul power, but also slightly improve dark element perception. Oh right, when I went to Lockye's gathering last time, I traded 10 shadow feathers from Kujin. Those can also boost dark elemental perception. I wonder if he has more. I could trade him some black obsidian amber he needs. Saul thought in his mind. As the carriage was about to enter the wizard tower grounds, Gorsa, though his eyes remained closed, seemed to be well aware of Saul's condition. "You finished absorbing the half-elf's magic." Saul knew he couldn't hide his actions from his master, so he nodded honestly. Only then did Gorsa slowly open his eyes. "You managed to enter the Forest of Four Seasons just before the half-elf closed it off. Your timing wasn't bad." Mentioning the half-elf reminded Saul of something. "Master, did you know that Kongsha used the Elven King's head?" Gorsa could have learned about this through Mark's memories. After all, Mark's brain was still in Gorsa's possession. "Kongsha's usually pretty timid. Didn't expect she'd go all out right before her death," Gorsa smiled, as if genuinely pleased that his student had managed to muster such courage. If he knew that Kongsha's bravery had been fueled entirely by her hatred for him, who knows if he'd still be happy, or perhaps he'd be even happier. "When I saw the Elven King, I just thought he looked beautiful and pleasing to the eye. I even forgot Kongsha's original appearance. But when I saw the half-elf, I realized he looked almost unrealistically beautiful. Compared to him, the Elven King seemed like an ordinary person. Why would a half-elf look better than an Elven King?" "The Elven King wasn't chosen based on beauty contests," Gorsa said matter-of-factly, "and their states were completely different. The Elven King's body had long since died, and who knows if his soul had gone insane or not. The half-elf, on the other hand," Gorsa laced his fingers together, "he's just unlucky." "Unlucky?" Saul didn't wait for an answer. He thought it over himself. "You mean, his extraordinary beauty is actually a kind of curse-like side effect?" Gorsa nodded. While the elven race has always been beautiful, they didn't place heavy importance on appearance. The half-elf's case is different. In an era where all elves have been sealed away, the lingering influence and power of the elves seek out any vessel capable of bearing them. and the elven power has already gone berserk. Gorsa chuckled meaningfully. It's like pollution constantly gathering onto you, but that same pollution grants you enormous strength. If you could see it, you'd notice that the half-elf's body is like a severely rotting corpse on the inside, while his exterior is held together by gathered elven power, making him beautiful to an unreal degree. His beauty has become more like a concept. Hearing this, Saul carefully recalled the half-elf's appearance and realized he really couldn't remember any details. Only the impression of unreal beauty lingered. Yet such beauty was founded on extreme pain. Of course, since the half-elf represents the last hope the elves could grasp, having high charm certainly helps him in his actions. Saul didn't entirely agree with this statement in his heart. After all, charm and appearance weren't universally effective everywhere, especially not on Gorsa. Both Lady Yura and Concha were stunning beauties, yet didn't Gorsa slice off half their skulls without hesitation. As the two conversed, suddenly a loud cry streaked across the sky. A heavy thud landed in the path of the moving carriage. The carriage driver, a figure conjured by magic, reacted instantly, pulling the horses to a sharp halt. The sound of metal footsteps approached from a distance, growing nearer. It sounded like high-heeled shoes clicking across marble. But Saul knew it wasn't high heels, it was real metal. Clack! The carriage door was flung open, unceremoniously. Kira, clad entirely in armor, appeared outside. Fresh red blood, not yet fully dried, still stained her silver-gray armor. Kira didn't enter the carriage, she just stood there, glaring fiercely at Gorsa. You sent me a position mark out of nowhere, just to make me clean up those land drifters for you. Unlike the straight-backed Saul, Gorsa remained leaning stiffly in the carriage, but his expression was extremely relaxed. Weren't you complaining you hadn't fought anyone in a while? Didn't I find you good opponents? Kira leaned against the carriage frame and casually stabbed her greatsword into the ground. They were all apprentices and first-rank wizards. I wanted to fight second-rank ones. Where, Wilder, why wasn't he on the ship? I had intended for someone else to handle him, but he escaped. Gorsa shook his head. Still, he's injured now. He won't be showing up for a while. Why did you suddenly want to kill him? Kira raised an eyebrow. Aren't you afraid someone will pull out the Western Treaty to restrain you? Of the two third-rank wizards who drafted the Western Treaty, one's dead and one's gone. Who's left to restrain me? Don't forget, the dead one still has students at Baton Academy, Kira reminded. Gorsa turned his face, tilting his head with a grin. Let's see if they dare come for me. Kira clicked her tongue and joked, since you're so impressive, why don't we have a fight? Not now, Gorsa closed his eyes again and leaned back. I might lose control and kill you. Kira rolled her eyes, then suddenly turned to Saul. When are you advancing to second rank? I want a match with you. Saul quickly turned to her, pursed his lips, and gave a shy smile. Soon, Lady Kira. Chapter 391, A Chance Encounter. Immediately, Kira's eyes widened by a full centimeter. She had just been teasing Saul, but she hadn't expected this little guy to actually dare respond. She looked toward Gorsa with some confusion, only to see that, although the man had his eyes closed, the bandages around his mouth were clearly lifting in a smile. Kira finally couldn't stand it anymore. She turned and walked away, but after only a couple of steps she stopped, turned her head slightly away from the two, and asked, Kina's Aruba is about to attempt advancing to second rank again. Want me to go kill him? But Gorsa simply said lazily, you just attacked the land drifters. Baton Academy must already be on alert, anxiously sending people to protect Kina's. After all, whichever side gets wiped out, it would affect their standing and their profits. Her suggestion rejected, Kira stomped off in a huff, riding away on her flying bird. Saul, however, noticed something. This time, Kira hadn't mentioned her sister at all. Had she already learned about the Tower Master's resurrection experiment progress? Or was there another reason? After another half-day, the carriage finally returned to the Wizard Tower, entering the outer departure corridor on the first level. Normally, carriages had to stop here. Both vehicle and passengers would undergo registration and inspection before proceeding separately. According to protocol, a second-rank wizard apprentice came forward to register the carriage and its occupants. Saul was the first to open the door and step down, taking the initiative to explain matters to the approaching apprentice. Upon realizing that the person inside the carriage was none other than the rarely seen Tower Master, the apprentice stiffened completely. The pen in his left hand trembled violently, unable to put anything down in the register. Saul gave him an understanding smile, but couldn't offer any real help. Who would have thought the Tower Master would walk through the front gate today? Fortunately, help arrived just then. Has the Tower Master returned? Gyudo came rushing over, pushing the apprentice aside without ceremony. The apprentice took the opportunity to quickly step into a corner, visibly relieved. Saul immediately noticed Kelly, running a half-step behind Gyudo. When Gyudo came to a sudden stop before the carriage, Kelly halted half a meter behind him, perfectly matching his rhythm. Clearly, she was long used to her master's irritable nature. Noticing Saul's gaze, Kelly, who had maintained a blank face the entire way, suddenly and swiftly blinked her right eye at him. Then she quickly returned to her usual cold, metallic expression, standing stiffly behind Gyudo. Kelly's back too. Did she complete her experiment this time? Saul was happy but also puzzled. Hadn't she just gone to Black Castle a few days ago? Has something gone wrong? What's the matter? Gorsa bent down and climbed out of the carriage. The moment he emerged, the entire first-level passageway fell silent. Everyone lifted their heads, gazing up at the absolute master of the Wizard Tower. Tower Master, Gyudo suddenly looked like he wanted to vomit, but before Gorsa, he forcibly swallowed it down. Gulp! Regarding the adhesive, my apprentice's research has made a breakthrough. Without hesitation, he shoved Kelly forward, proudly displaying his achievement. Kelly looked up at the towering Tower Master, but could only see a glimpse of his pink chin under the cloak. Even with her usual bold and stubborn personality, she could only fumble with her lips, unable to speak immediately. Gorsa wasn't in a rush. He glanced around, noticing that nearly everyone was frozen in place, and smiled at Gyudo. To the 19th floor. Gyudo nodded, and then the three of them disappeared at once. Saul was left standing there, stunned. He was part of the resurrection experiment too. Why hadn't they brought him along? Or was Gorsa limited to teleporting two people at once? Left behind, Saul recalled what Gyudo had said. The adhesive must be the substance Gorsa mentioned earlier, something that would help Yura's soul-body fuse with the new vessel. He hadn't expected Kelly, who had been focused on researching metallic radioactive toxins, to end up participating in the resurrection experiment because of this. Standing in the slowly bustling passageway, Saul rummaged through his compressed pack. He pulled out the necklace Kelly had given him, wondering how it might be related to the adhesive. At the same time, he caught sight of the gray matter notebook Senior Byron had given him. Actually, gray matter solution could also help strengthen the soul, another good option for boosting soul strength. He decided to personally verify it later at the second warehouse, and then ask Senior Byron if he might want to hand over the notebook to the Tower Master in exchange for some credits. However, Saul didn't plan to drag Byron into the resurrection experiment. He didn't know why, but he had a gut feeling that getting too involved might not end well. Just look at Kongsha and Ivan. Among the Tower Master's apprentices, only Haywood seemed to be living normally. Even Saul himself couldn't guarantee that if he ever lost his value, he could survive in any recognizable form. Of course, he still had confidence in his own fate. It was just a pity that Kelly had already been pushed in front of the Tower Master by Gyuto. But for just an adhesive, she probably wouldn't have to pay too steep a price. At that moment, another carriage rolled past Saul and stopped at the exit, waiting for passengers. As soon as it halted, two cloaked figures hurried out from a side passage. As the first one boarded the carriage, Saul glanced over absent-mindedly, and under the shadow of the hood he saw a familiar face. "Senior Byron," Saul blinked. "Is he heading out?" He moved closer, initially just wanting to say hello, but then caught sight of the second person hiding under the cloak. It was Jiro. Saul remembered clearly that Byron and Jiro practically had no dealings with each other. And Byron had always been indifferent to the Mutual Aid Society's senior members. He was a loner, never proactively engaging with them. A bad feeling welled up in Saul's heart, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. He quickened his steps, wanting to get a better look. But just then, a third person emerged from the passage, blocking his path. Saul looked up to see Lakai's smiling face. "Hey there, Saul." "Good afternoon, Senior Lakai." Saul nodded slightly, not stopping, and skirted around him. Lakai raised an eyebrow and followed right behind Saul. "Senior Byron, are you heading out?" Saul reached the carriage, craning his neck toward the people already seated inside. The first to turn was Jiro, wearing his usual punchable grin. "We've got a mission outside. What you want in, fine by me." Saul ignored Jiro and looked at Byron instead. Byron slowly turned his head toward Saul and slowly nodded. Oh. It seemed normal enough. Jiro even patted the empty seat beside him, saying to Saul, "Even though you're not registered for this mission, if you want to come, just hop on." Behind Saul, Lakai's smile stiffened slightly. He shot Jiro a dark, sharp look. Unfortunately, under normal circumstances, Saul shouldn't be heading out on another expedition so soon. He had just absorbed the magic power of a half-elf, not only fully absorbed but still needed time to stabilize it. He was close to truly mastering it and feeding it back into himself, but not quite there yet. Yet watching Byron, who normally disliked these two, suddenly going out with them made Saul's instincts scream in alarm. He was just about to hop into the carriage when Byron lightly shook his head at him. Tilde. Saul froze on the spot. Chapter 392, Traces. Not coming. Seeing that Saul still hadn't gotten into the carriage, Jiro shrugged, the excitement on his face fading a little. "We're in a hurry, so we're heading off first." Lakai also didn't get into the carriage, still standing behind Saul. It seemed that his only purpose in appearing here was to see the two of them off. He grinned and waved goodbye to Jiro and Byron. Jiro listlessly waved back, while Byron had already turned away, not even bothering to acknowledge Lakai. This behavior was very much in line with Byron's character. Saul's tense shoulders relaxed slightly. "All right, I'll wait until Senior Byron returns before asking him my questions." Hidden under the shadow of his cloak, Byron gave a slight nod. The carriage gradually pulled away under the watchful eyes of Saul and Lakai. "Saul, how come every time you go out, your strength increases so much?" Only now did Lakai seem to notice the change in Saul's magical fluctuations, and the smile on his face grew noticeably bitter. Saul had no interest in exchanging pleasantries. He simply nodded and said, "By chance, I'll be heading back first, Senior Lakai." Such a perfunctory answer made Lakai raise his right eyebrow. But before he could say anything, Saul had already turned and left, the hem of his black apprentice robe fluttering lightly in the air. Even as Saul made his way up the corridor, Lakai still stood there, his gaze following the carriage as it disappeared into the trees. Only when the carriage was completely out of sight did a cold glint flash across his eyes. Saul hurried directly back to the apprentice dormitories located on the 12th floor of the West Tower. Out of laziness, and because he hadn't lived there for a long time, Saul hadn't changed rooms even after being promoted to a third-rank apprentice. This time, unlike usual, he didn't first head to the second storeroom to organize his gains and insights. Instead, as soon as he entered his room, he casually threw his compressed bag and outer robe onto the floor. Then he himself flopped into the high-backed wooden chair with a heavy thud. Immediately, without pause, soul separation. An invisible soul body peeled away from his physical body. Saul's soul form rippled like water for a moment before stabilizing into the shape of his physical self. His feet left the ground as he floated upward. Since completing his second body modification, Saul had rarely taken the initiative to separate his soul from his body. Partly due to the Tower Master's warning, and partly because of the cautionary tales from people like Yura. He constantly reminded himself, never get carried away just because you can easily leave your body. But today he had no choice. Because when he saw Byron in the carriage earlier, at first nothing had seemed wrong. It was only Byron's choice to travel with Jiro and Lakai that made Saul feel something was off. So by instinct, Saul triggered a habitual move, semi-immersive meditation. This move had become ingrained into his muscle memory, so much so that activating it didn't cause any noticeable change in his outward appearance. But what he saw under that state froze all the blood in his veins. In normal perception, Byron's body radiated ordinary magical and mental energy. But under the semi-immersive view, it turned into countless black, thread-like worms crawling from his pores and running down Byron's face, from the crown of his head to where his collar covered his neck. A black thread pierced straight through. At that moment, all of Saul's unease and confusion vanished. He didn't clench his fists, didn't frown, and even relaxed his tense muscles slightly. Beneath his calm exterior, however, his blood churned like a whirlpool in the deep sea, silent but fierce. He even managed to bid Lakai goodbye, politely and distantly, just as he would have before. But once he returned to the dormitory, away from prying eyes, the suppressed tension erupted into tremors that shook his whole body, making his movements clumsy and scattered. Even so, he successfully separated his soul from his body in a single attempt and soared swiftly upward. Aside from some special locations, the Wizard Tower didn't have barriers between floors to block soul bodies. Saul reached Byron's dormitory without issue, finding a room in utter disarray. But the chaos wasn't unusual. He had visited Byron's dorm before, and it was always a mess. Even the overturned items he had noticed on his last visit remained, scattered in exactly the same way. Saul walked slowly, scanning the entire room with his eyes. There had been almost no changes. Senior Byron probably hasn't left the Wizard Tower recently. He usually conducts experiments in his dormitory. With defensive magic formations layered here, ordinary apprentices wouldn't be able to break in. Could it be that something didn't happen here? But if Byron wasn't attacked here, it would be even harder for Saul to figure out where the incident occurred. Still, this is the place he spent the most time. If there are no clues here, I can look elsewhere. Thinking this, Saul moved deeper into the room. Soon, he spotted Byron's long table and experiment bench, chaotic all around, but always with a small, neat clearing in the middle. There are some damaged marks at the center. He wouldn't normally do experiments directly on the writing desk. Saul immediately realized something was wrong. He bent down, leveling his eyes with the tabletop, carefully studying the uneven scars. This seems like damage caused by corrosive magic. Saul extended a translucent finger, gently tracing the corroded area. The size, about the size of a book, He straightened up, looking down at the desk, and let out a self-deprecating laugh. Books are usually what you put on a desk, aren't they? If it had been Byron himself destroying a book or document, there would be no reason to corrode the desk. Moreover, the nature of this power didn't match the usual characteristics of Byron's magic. Someone had destroyed something here, and even went so far as to wipe away traces, scarring the table's surface in the process. For the corrosion to seep into the desk, it was probably a sheet of paper, and freshly written paper at that. Saul closed his eyes where he stood. Byron had taken out a piece of paper, written something on it, then something happened. The paper disappeared, and the slight indentations it left were wiped away. Saul opened his eyes. Did Senior Byron discover something? Did he leave behind something important, only to have it destroyed? Saul didn't want to keep thinking along these lines. But when he recalled that Byron, covered in black, thread-like worms, with a crack running down the middle of his head, he had to confront a cruel reality. Byron in that state was no longer alive. Saul slammed his fists down on the table, striking the slightly corroded area. But as a soul body, his fists simply passed through the wood, falling helplessly into the air. Just like the helplessness he felt inside. Lakai Jiro. Byron's death was definitely connected to the two of them. They had killed Byron, and then controlled his corpse to carry him away. Saul's translucent eyes were tinged with grayish blood, and the skin around them began to soften. Slender, octopus-like tendrils slithered from beneath his skin, twisting and coiling, as if trying to transform Saul into some kind of terrifying monster. Even though his outward appearance grew monstrous, Saul's mind grew even clearer. Their goal in taking the body must be to conceal the death. After all, once someone leaves the Wizard Tower, it takes at least half a year before they're officially considered dead. Senior Byron, did you discover some critical information, or were you trying to pass something to me, and that's why you were silenced? Still barely maintaining a human form, Saul slowly withdrew his transparent hands from the wood, brushing past a quill lying nearby. There was still some ink clinging to the quill's tip, and a few droplets scattered on the desk, as if the pen had been dropped in a hurry. Despite Byron's messy habits, his dorm was never dirty. Thus, these ink spots likely appeared when Byron met with misfortune. Saul stared at the pen, grief and rage threatening to tear apart his rationality. The quill fell and wasn't moved again. The assailant must have dealt with Byron almost instantly. Whoever did this was not an apprentice. Was it a mentor or Gorsa? As he stared, Saul suddenly narrowed his eyes. He thought he saw something unusual on the pen's shaft. The tendrils writhing around his body retracted slightly, as Saul lowered himself to be level with the table once more. The quill shaft was thin and relatively soft. At the spot where a thumb would grip the pen, Saul spotted a faint mark, a symbol scratched out with a fingernail. There was no magic involved, and the mark was so shallow that anyone not meticulously inspecting the items here would never have noticed it. Etched onto the shaft was a single character. Gray. Chapter 393, Soul Extraction. What is gray? What could make Byron go so far as to leave that word on his pen? While thinking blankly, Saul plunged downward at high speed. As soon as he returned to the dormitory, he immediately grabbed his compressed bag and pushed the door open to leave. Ash, the thing Byron and I have both been involved with recently is the gray matter. Could it be that he found something abnormal within the gray matter? But if it were just that, it shouldn't have attracted such a deadly ambush, unless he told the person who harmed him about his research, and the gray matter has some critical importance. Saul hurried up the ramp, following the turn upward. Two first-rank apprentices were coming down together from above. When they saw Saul, they immediately made way, but dared not utter a word. Since leaving his dormitory, Saul had been walking with his eyes slightly narrowed, looking like he hadn't slept and had no spirit at all. As he passed the two juniors, his pupils only shifted slightly, then quickly returned to normal, as if he looked down on them entirely. The two apprentices, seeing that Saul had no intention of acknowledging them, quickly sped up their pace to descend to a lower level, breathing a sigh of relief. But what they didn't know was that Saul had already observed the fluctuations of their mental waves carefully through semi-immersive meditation. The frequency of their mental waves is very high, but there's not much magic leaking. They're very nervous, using low-level apprentices to monitor me. Saul arrived at the floor where Byron's dormitory was located and immediately glanced at the nearby rooms. Just as he stepped into the corridor, the door to the room on Byron's left opened, and a figure stepped out. Seeing Saul, the person froze for a moment, but still nodded in greeting. Although he was also a third-rank apprentice, he was one who had advanced using borrowed locator formulas. His talent and strength were average, belonging to the kind who could only assist mentors or stronger third-rank apprentices. Saul squinted at him, noticing that the other's mental force was well contained. But that didn't matter. After all, how could it just so happen that every time I pass by, someone happens to come out? All these coincidences are just too coincidental, aren't they? Saul directly took a sidestep, blocking the man's way. "Senior, do you live next door to Byron?" Yes," the other stammered slightly. "I have some business with him." He seemed to have gone out. I saw him leave with his pack today." Saul smiled. "I know, but I want to be the first to see him when he returns." "Then should I notify you if I see him back?" "No need for the trouble." Saul lifted the compressed pack in his hand and shook it lightly. "I'll just move into your room." The third-rank apprentice instantly froze. But Saul didn't give him any chance to refuse. He directly grabbed the man's sleeve and pressed his hand onto the doorknob. "Open the door." The apprentice was utterly stunned by Saul's move. But you can just find another room to move into. All the necessary materials can be collected at the registration office. Put it all on my tab." "But I didn't plan on moving." The apprentice still tried to refuse, but when he looked into Saul's eyes, terror suddenly swept across his face. He was shocked to see Saul's appearance changing bit by bit. His figure stretched taller, his brow bone widened, and his pale skin turned a waxy yellow. Every new feature was disturbingly familiar. Before his eyes, Saul was slowly, piece by piece, transforming into him. "Go to the registration office now and find a new room, or I'll use another method to replace you." Saul's voice gradually deepened until it exactly matched the apprentice's own voice. The apprentice's legs nearly gave out. Had Saul not been holding his arm, he probably would have collapsed on the spot. He couldn't tear his eyes away from that changing face, but under Saul's pressure, he could only stiffly, with great effort, open the door. Once the door opened, Saul released his arm and walked straight into the dormitory. The third-rank apprentice could only watch helplessly as Saul entered and immediately changed the room's permissions. Bang! The door slammed shut. The apprentice turned around in a daze and staggered like a sleepwalker toward the east tower. I need to change dormitories. Yes. If there's a fee, put it on Saul's account." He repeated this sentence over and over in his mind, stumbling forward in a trance. Saul didn't care whether the man would first go to the registration office or rush off to report to Lakai about what had just happened. As soon as Saul entered the new dormitory, he immediately swept his gaze around. No valuables. Looks like this guy mainly stays in the lab. A silver butterfly fluttered out from Saul's eye, landing on his right shoulder. "Brother Saul, why didn't you let me erase his memory just now?" Just before they entered, Saul had authorized Penny to assist in muddling the apprentice's consciousness. If the man hadn't finally given in, Saul wouldn't have minded helping him change identities entirely. "No need," Saul said as he unpacked pieces of sorcery materials and tools from his compressed pack. "No matter how covertly I take over this room, Loki, who's watching me would find out. Since I saw them taking Byron away, Loki wouldn't possibly ease up on his vigilance toward me. Instead of layering on more secretive moves and making them even more wary, it's better to be straightforward. It might even put them a little more at ease." With that, Saul picked out a few materials that were currently usable and dumped them onto the long table in the room. The long table at least was clean. Saul quickly processed the materials and then picked up a hanging brush from the table. He spread out his left hand, palm facing upward. The skin of his palm automatically split open into a wound about 3 centimeters long and 1 centimeter deep. Bright red blood welled up from the cut, but stopped overflowing once the hollow of his palm was filled. Then he moved into the equally clean front hall, dipped the brush in his blood, and began drawing a sorcery formation on the ground. The silver butterfly lifted off, asking with disbelief, "Brother Saul, what are you doing?" "Drawing a soul extraction formation. This room is closest to Byron's and can cover his dormitory perfectly." Saul had drawn this formation several times before, and his hand was practiced. Only this time was tight. He had no chance to slowly prepare the materials needed for the array. But after undergoing his second sorceress body reconstruction, Saul's blood could store special magic power, making it usable in emergencies. He quickly completed the soul extraction formation, placed the corresponding sorcery materials at the nodes, and finally piled enough magic crystals onto the energy supply point. After placing down the remaining materials, Saul flicked his wrist to heal his palm and then stood in the center of the formation. "Senior Byron, you were able to endure in the corpse chamber alone for over 10 years, and you dared to fuse a wraith into yourself to strengthen your soul for the sake of becoming a true wizard. You shouldn't have died so easily, even if only your soul remains. Come, help me condense the 5th black page, and together we'll have our revenge." Closing his eyes, Saul stirred his spiritual body, sending a surge of magic into the formation. The blood-red array burst into pale flames, flowing across the entire formation like liquid. The fire tongues stretched outward, licking at nearby objects but igniting nothing. Fragments of debris floated into the formation, but none of them belonged to Byron's soul. As the minutes passed, the magic fueling the formation gradually ran dry, and the flames inevitably weakened. Saul's expression shifted from solemnity to disbelief. "No soul body. Why is it so clean? Even if the attacker destroyed his soul, there should at least be fragments left." While Saul waited anxiously and unwillingly, the white fire flickered weaker and weaker until it completely extinguished. No black page materialized before him. Saul's arm slowly lowered. "Brother Saul," Penny hovered in front of him, her voice cautious. "Maybe I can try sneaking into Loki's dream and see what exactly they did." "No need." Saul suddenly opened his eyes, sharp as blades. "There's definitely a true wizard monitoring Loki. With your current strength, you'd easily get trapped." But Penny soon noticed something strange. The frustration on Saul's face had vanished, replaced instead by a faint glow of excitement. "Brother Saul, are you okay?" Penny's voice shrank even smaller, afraid he was about to lose control and do something drastic. Saul's lips slowly curved upward. "It's too clean." "Huh?" Penny was confused. "I said," Saul repeated, voice low, "Senior Byron's room is too clean." Chapter 394, Dreamscape Drifting. Saul walked out of the dormitory next to Byron's, without any expression on his face. He first returned to his own room, repacked his barely unpacked luggage, slid a note under Kelly's door, and then, without any hesitation, moved into the room next to Byron's. That evening, the third-rank apprentice who had been forced to move out, and whose name Saul still didn't know, timidly knocked on Saul's door. He had some belongings he wanted to retrieve. Saul, in a rather good mood, decided not to make things difficult for him and let him in to collect his things. The third-rank apprentice entered without daring to look around. He only went straight to the bedroom and the desk, gathering a few necessities. However, just before he left, his expression suddenly stiffened. Moving stiffly like a puppet, he walked up to Saul, who was leaning against the wall with arms crossed, opened his mouth, and mechanically spoke a sentence. There are traces of spellcasting, but the defensive formation in the dormitory hasn't been damaged. After speaking, he woodenly returned to where he had been standing. His expression then flickered into a brief confusion before returning to that cautious, meek demeanor. He continued gathering his things and headed out. Just as the door closed behind him, a silver butterfly drifted out from his eye, laughing playfully as it flew to perch on Saul's shoulder. Throughout the whole scene, Saul had simply stood there, arms folded, watching the act unfold before him. After the third-rank apprentice left, Saul pushed himself off the wall and walked to the center of the room. "You didn't startle him, did you?" Saul asked. This was the first time he had allowed Penny to cast freely. "Don't worry, brother Saul. I didn't alter his cognition, just had him play out what he most wanted to do next, that's all. And he won't remember a thing, he. Saul nodded, choosing to trust Penny. After all, nightmare butterflies were notoriously bizarre in the legends. If a fully matured one could easily deceive true wizards, then even if Penny's strength hadn't fully recovered yet, dealing with a trash third-rank apprentice should be no problem. Besides, even if the apprentice somehow noticed Saul had tampered with him, Saul wasn't worried. In the Wizard Tower, Saul was known for his caution. Testing a third-rank apprentice wouldn't reveal his true intentions. After all, Saul hadn't instructed the apprentice to actually do anything. All right, for now, they probably won't send anyone else. Too much probing would only expose their own guilty conscience. Picking up his pack, Saul headed out. "We've stayed here long enough. Let's go to the second storage." Penny, seeing Saul's renewed energy, was also happy, though she couldn't quite understand how Saul had so suddenly pulled himself out of his grief and anger. Was it possible that Saul's sadness and rage when facing the news of Byron's likely death had all been an act? "What are you thinking about?" As the diary's owner, Saul could naturally sense the complicated emotions of the diary's captive. Penny didn't overthink it and directly asked, "Brother Saul, why aren't you sad anymore?" Closing his dormitory door behind him, Saul maintained his cold, expressionless face and quickly headed toward the East Tower. "I already told you, it was too clean. That's not how a room where someone just died should look." When Saul had seen Byron being dragged away by the manipulators, his body devoid of life, he truly believed Byron was dead. But after 2 separate investigations of Byron's dormitory, after confirming it was the crime scene, Saul had found not a single trace of Byron's soul fragment. Someone else might have assumed they simply failed to find the soul of the dead, but Saul had the diary's help to collect Byron's soul, and even then he had found nothing, not even a scrap. The diary couldn't have missed anything. This planted a seed of hope in Saul's heart. Senior Byron is likely in a state where his soul and body have separated. Saul recalled the last time he saw Byron and the behavior of Locke and Jiro beside him. They probably wanted to secretly move the body to cover up his death. They might not even realize that Byron's soul hasn't dissipated. So Byron might still be out there like me once, wandering as a soul. Just whether he escaped on his own or was captured, that's the question. Even with just a toe's worth of thinking, Saul could tell that Byron's situation right now was definitely bad. He had to find him as soon as possible. but Saul knew that every move he made was being watched closely. If he too obviously searched for Byron's soul, he might inadvertently expose Byron to the enemy. Right now, Saul's plan was to use soul separation to search for Byron. But soul separation wasn't foolproof, and its range was limited. He might have to separate multiple times in different areas, which was dangerous. At that moment, Penny suddenly flitted around in front of Saul's eyes, fluttering her wings. "Brother Saul, Penny is really good at finding people." "How will you find?" Saul started to ask, then guessed, "You want to search through dreams." "Exactly." Finding someone's dream was much subtler than finding their existence directly. "But can you really slip into dreams freely inside the wizard tower?" He, I'll need to borrow your strength, Brother Saul." "How?" "Brother Saul, although last time I mistakenly led you into an elf's consciousness world, you still safely came out and even benefited from it," Penny said carefully. "Your mental energy has become even more stable, more resistant to contamination. I can now transform into your wings and let you personally conduct a dreamscape drift. I think if Byron sees you, he'll definitely approach on his own." Saul was immediately tempted, though he had never entered someone else's dream before. It sounded too fantastical. "Even though my contamination resistance is stronger, dreamscape drifting is still dangerous, right?" The nightmare butterfly fluttered its wings. "It's true that in dreams you might encounter things we can't explain or resist, but Penny's really good at running away. I'll definitely get Brother Saul out safely." Penny then patiently explained the principle of dreamscape drifting to Saul. By then, Saul had already reached the massive bronze doors on the first floor of the East Tower. He looked at the towering, eerie bronze doors and slowly pushed open the left one. "All right, tonight we'll give it a try." He made up his mind, but they still had to wait for the right time. At night, when the most people were asleep and dreams were strongest, their search range would be at its widest. One boy, one butterfly, entered the second storage room. Saul first checked Hayden's condition, confirming that the guy's spirit was still stable. Then he quickly pulled out the gray matter notebook Byron had given him. Although Saul had also obtained gray matter, he hadn't had the time to study it deeply. After getting Byron's gray matter notes, he hadn't tried brewing anything either, since they'd been preparing for the Elven Valley trip. Now that Byron had left him a clue with the word gray matter was the first thing Saul thought of. Before he could find Byron's soul, or find out what had become of it, he needed to be ready. At the very least, he had to figure out why Locke and the others had targeted Byron. Materials were abundant at hand. Saul quickly followed the notebook's guidance and brewed the gray matter potion. Judging by its properties, it seems to have been successfully brewed. The nature isn't too problematic either. It matches the notebook's description, enhancing spirit-body strength. Saul carefully stored the brewed potion. But at the same time, Senior Byron didn't completely understand gray matter's composition either. Saul tapped the table lightly with his fingers. Penny flew above the vial, looking rather bored. She had no interest in these things. The only thing that truly excited her was the veiled crystal essence, but Saul was very strict about how much she got. Penny now only hoped to help Saul more in exchange for more veiled crystal essence. Seeing Saul once again deep in calculations, Penny aimlessly circled around him. On her third lap, whoosh! Suddenly, a black shadow stretched from behind Saul's neck and lunged straight for the silver butterfly. Penny didn't even have time to react. When she noticed the black shadow, all she saw was a gaping mouth shaped like a flat plane, lined with jagged teeth. "You again!" Penny barely got the words out before she was swallowed whole by the black mouth. Saul turned around and exclaimed in surprise, "Little Algie, you're awake." Little Algie looked innocently back at him, its mouth still puffed up comically. Saul's heart skipped. He immediately looked toward where Penny had just been. There was no silver butterfly there anymore. The nightmare butterfly hadn't phased back out through little Algie's head like it had before. Saul immediately stood up. "Little Algie, if something's in your mouth, spit it out." Little Algie gave a mighty puff, and a saliva-soaked silver butterfly splattered onto the floor. All of Saul's earlier tension from studying gray matter was utterly broken by the scene before him. As Penny's pitiful sobs filled the room, Saul, both astonished and delighted, said, "Little Algie, you can actually touch a nightmare butterfly now." Chapter 395, Searching and Hidden Dangers. Little Algie, who had just woken up, had no idea what had happened. It was merely playing around with the little butterflies it could see but never touch, just like usual. Only this time, it actually managed to bite one. Staring at the nightmare butterfly twitching on the ground, it turned to Saul, a little flustered. Saul patted little Algie's head. "It's fine. Penny probably just got a little carried away." When little Algie fell into a deep sleep after devouring the veiled crystal essence, Saul had already expected it might undergo some changes. Being able to touch nightmare butterflies was unexpected, but not entirely surprising. After receiving the half-elf's gift, Saul himself had gained the ability to touch nightmare butterflies. However, aside from that, he hadn't yet discovered any other uses. "All right, I'll apologize to you on little Algie's behalf." Saul picked Penny up from the floor, finding that although she was damp, there was no sticky, saliva-like feel. Rather, it was more like tiny water droplets condensed on a window pane in winter. "To make it up to you, I'll give you half a piece of veiled crystal essence." The moment Penny heard that, she sprang out of Saul's hand and shrieked, "A whole piece." Saul smiled. "Fine half-a-piece deal." Penny immediately changed her tune. Still, since Saul needed Penny's help for tonight's dreamscape drifting, he didn't let her absorb the half-piece just yet. He didn't want her overeating and falling asleep like little Algie. That night, Saul returned to the dormitory next to Byron's and fell asleep. For many wizard apprentices, sleep was considered a waste of time. Only when they accumulated a lot of exhaustion would they take a brief nap to balance their state. Even though sleep and meditation had the same effect on recovering the mental body, meditation, even being slightly more efficient, the feeling of waking up refreshed from a deep sleep was irreplaceable. Thus, every apprentice still chose to sleep once in a while. Plus, thanks to the stewards and servants on the lower floors of the wizard tower, Saul didn't have to worry about dream power becoming too scarce inside the tower. When Saul opened his eyes again, for a moment he couldn't even tell if he was dreaming, because he was still lying in the same unfamiliar dormitory, and everything around him seemed unchanged. But when he sat up, he realized there was now a pair of silver butterfly wings on his back. The wings looked like silver metal, intricately worked and carved, yet when Saul reached back to touch them, he felt a layer of fine, soft fur. Sensing the information emerging in his mind, Saul carefully controlled the wings behind him, making them flutter slowly. Once he felt he could move them freely, he began beating them at a high frequency. He didn't feel like he was moving himself, but the scenery around him rapidly receded. It was like sitting on a high-speed train, watching fences and trees flash by outside the window. The wings suddenly stopped beating, and Saul plunged into a bizarre, kaleidoscopic world. All around him was a sea of shifting, blending radiance. Besides the colorful glow, he could see several small children sleeping amid the light. These children, who had humanoid forms, were likely manifestations of the dreamer's consciousness, and they seemed harmless. This time, Saul gently fluttered his wings to move toward the sleeping children. But as he got closer, he realized with a jolt, none of the children had faces. Their bodies were normal, but their faces, completely wiped clean, as if erased by some unseen hand. Perhaps it was Saul's shock that caused a ripple in his consciousness. Perhaps he had simply gotten too close. One of the faceless children stirred, its blank head turning toward Saul. Not Senior Byron, Saul immediately judged from the mental fluctuations he sensed. Before the other children could all turn to face him, he rapidly beat his wings. High-frequency wing beats allowed him to jump between different dreams, different consciousnesses. Slow wing beats let him move within the same dream. Though the legends of nightmare butterflies sounded mysterious and powerful, they weren't without limits otherwise. They wouldn't have been chased so desperately by second-rank wizards. They harmed or influenced people mainly by subtly, gradually altering their memories. Their primary method was dreamscape drifting. When Saul's surroundings stabilized again, he found himself facing two gigantic, opposing faces. The faces loomed into the sky. Even after flying for a while, Saul only managed to travel from one mouth up to a nose. With faces this huge, it's hard to even tell what they look like. Saul was just pondering how to influence them when one of the faces suddenly opened its eyes. It seemed to notice Saul's presence, straining to glance downward with its eyeball. Then it abruptly opened its mouth, unleashing a gust that blew Saul straight onto the other face's nose bridge. And that face, too, was roused from sleep. This one's not Byron either. Saul confirmed quickly and without hesitation beat his wings. The two colossal faces instantly retreated into the distance. After that, Saul cruised through dozens more dreams. He even suspected one of them belonged to some sort of wraith. Tonight, Saul didn't encounter anything overly dangerous, but he also didn't find any trace of Senior Byron's soul. Despite Penny's assistance, after exploring dozens of dreams, Saul's mental body became exhausted and he was forcibly ejected from the dreamscape. This time, he quickly sank into a deep, dreamless sleep. For the next 3 days straight, Saul spent his days researching the gray matter potion, and his nights half searching for Byron, half sleeping. Unfortunately, the distance between dreams usually had no relation to the physical distance between the dreamers. So even though Saul was sleeping in the room next to Byron's, he still couldn't locate his senior's soul. The longer it dragged on, the more anxious Saul became. On the 4th morning, Saul's dormitory door was suddenly knocked. Still asleep, Saul instantly opened his eyes and sprang out of bed. He rushed to open the door and, to his delight, found Kelly standing outside. "You finally made it." Saul breathed a sigh of relief and hurriedly ushered her inside. Kelly had dark half-moons hanging under her eyes. She collapsed onto the dorm's only chair. "I'm dead tired. I had to make 10 batches of premium adhesive these past 2 days, and I had to do it all in front of the tower master. My legs are still like jelly." Although Kelly had been terrified when she first met Gorsa, after 3 days working under him, she had grown much more at ease. This time, her legs were truly weak from exhaustion, not fear. Saul had originally wanted to ask her about the adhesive anyway. That's why he'd left the note at her dorm. Now he eagerly served her water and food. "Could you give me the formula for the premium adhesive?" Kelly was still gulping water. When she heard that, she put the cup down and looked at Saul. She hesitated only slightly. "Sure. Anyway, our master never said it had to be kept secret from you." With that, she stopped drinking and immediately grabbed the pen and paper from Saul's desk to start writing. Having made 10 batches already, she could practically recite the formula backward. Saul watched as she carefully wrote out the entire process, all while thinking to himself whether these materials might have any hidden dangers when combined. However, the formula heavily relied on elements Saul wasn't familiar with, leaving large parts of it a mystery to him. So when Kelly finished writing, Saul asked her to explain every part he didn't understand. Though not yet a 3rd-rank apprentice, Kelly was incredibly knowledgeable, especially about adhesives and various toxins. She patiently explained everything to Saul. Kelly, do you think this potion has any hidden dangers? Hidden dangers. For example, if someone added a certain elemental material to it, could it turn into a deadly poison or something? Chapter 396, High Profile. Kelly didn't think too long before answering Saul's question. If you're calling this a hidden danger, then yes, there definitely is one. Kelly, looking very familiar with the topic, began counting on her fingers, listing a total of 7 kinds of magic materials. That's all I can think of for now. So many. Saul had originally only intended to start with the adhesive used alongside the blue water soul to reverse engineer possible problems hidden within the gray matter. After all, Gorsa had already told him that the gray matter was the main component of the blue water soul. Since Byron might have been harmed because of the gray matter, it was hard for Saul not to link this to the resurrection experiment. He had previously heard that one of the backup resurrection plans had suddenly made a breakthrough, and many mentors were busy because of it. Saul had been a bit curious, but hadn't looked into it deeply. That plan probably involved areas of knowledge he wasn't familiar with at all. Relearning it would be less efficient than continuing to improve his own experiment. But now, with Byron suddenly being harmed, he had no choice but to consider whether there was some conspiracy behind the resurrection plan. Faced with Saul's concern, Kelly shrugged. What I gave you are just examples based on my understanding of the formula. In reality, there are many more magic materials that could completely change a potion's properties. She saw Saul frowning and lifted her cup to her lips. Yet, when the water tilted, she didn't drink. The field of toxicology knowledge is just like that. Sometimes adding just one material can greatly amplify a potion's toxicity. The internal composition and external influencing factors are many. If you really want to harm someone, it's absolutely possible. Kelly's voice bounced off the water's surface inside the cup, sending ripples that made her tone sound a little muffled. But hearing this explanation, Saul actually relaxed. He thought silently, that's right. Potions in the field of toxicology are indeed prone to problems, but precisely because of that, the Tower Master wouldn't have taken this part of the experiment lightly. And with his ability, he would have personally prepared the potion, while Guido and Kelly only needed to produce a formula that could pass the tests. Thus, the focus once again returned to the blue water soul. If Saul wanted to know why Senior Byron was targeted, he still had to uncover the secrets within the blue water soul, or rather, within the gray matter. Gorsa had once said that the blue water soul was discovered by Kaz, then further developed with new materials by Rum, eventually becoming the blue water soul as they knew it. Thus, both of them might know the hidden secrets of the gray matter. Rum seemed to harbor resentment against the Tower Master, making him even more suspicious. But Saul wasn't sure if his attitude was truly as loyal as he outwardly showed toward Gorsa. After all, even Saul himself had his reservations. For instance, he had never told Gorsa about obtaining the Eye of Banishment in the Elven Valley, and he had only lightly brushed over Kongsha's strong hatred for Gorsa. He would continue to actively participate in the resurrection experiment, working on reducing vessel rejection to help Gorsa realize a long-term resurrection plan. But if, in the end, Gorsa still decided to act against him, Saul would need to have his own backup options. So, when he learned that there were other resurrection plans potentially capable of meeting Gorsa's demands, he was honestly quite pleased. He just hadn't expected that this alternative resurrection plan might not be pure in its intentions. If they were trying to use it to attack Gorsa, would Saul merely watch coldly, or would he help Gorsa strike back? You called me over just to ask this. Kelly noticed Saul had been silent for too long, deep in thought. She glanced down at her water-bloated belly and finally put her cup down. I also wanted to ask if you've developed the antidote for the alpha necklace yet." Kelly rolled her eyes. It's only been a few days. How could it be that fast? But the improvement of the premium adhesive did come about thanks to a weakened version of Alpha's catalyst effect. So at least there's a good accidental result. She gave Saul a sideways look. "Anything else?" Saul froze for a moment, then smiled. "Don't worry, I'm preparing your birthday present." Once Kelly left looking relatively satisfied, Saul immediately headed for the second storeroom, using his transmission pen to notify Tower Master Gorsa that his resurrection experiment was ready for preliminary verification. Although Gorsa had just sent Kelly and Guido away, he still responded to Saul at once. "Bring the necessary items and come to the 20th floor." Receiving Gorsa's instructions, Saul had little Algie carry a corpse, while he himself brought potion materials and notes from the storeroom, heading up the East Tower's spiral ramp toward the 20th floor. It was already past 7 in the morning, peak hours in the East Tower corridors. Saul walked alone at the front, with eerie black tentacles behind him carrying a stiff corpse. The scene frightened many low-ranking apprentices who didn't dare look twice. Both Saul and little Algie exuded extremely strong magic fluctuations. Even the motionless corpse radiated a sinister aura. 2 third-rank apprentices happened to pass by. Unlike the low-ranking apprentices, they weren't alarmed at first. But when they recognized the corpse's face, their expressions changed dramatically, and they froze in place, unable to recover even after Saul walked away. When they finally managed to turn around for another look, their gazes toward Saul were filled with deep apprehension. In fact, Saul could have simply used a red candle to make the corpse move on its own. But he worried that doing so might accidentally animate all the corpses stored in the storeroom. Broad daylight chaos like that would truly cause an uproar. The starring and whispering had to cease when Saul reached the 19th floor, but almost immediately, a buzz of discussion broke out. Soon after, Saul reached the 20th floor and stepped through the large bronze door. Inside the massive, circular laboratory, Gorsa was sitting at the edge of an open stone coffin. On the floor across from him lay a notebook, its pages splayed messily as if someone had been standing there reading, and then was suddenly teleported away the moment Saul entered. Saul walked over and naturally picked up the notebook, offering it to Gorsa. "Toss it, it's meaningless," Gorsa said, not intending to take it. So Saul placed it onto the round table in the center of the room. As he set it down, his fingertip casually lifted the cover slightly. He saw written on it, a discussion on the feasibility of purging contamination via electric shock. The handwriting was neat and delicate, and Saul immediately thought of Mentor Monica. Mentor Monica was also a beauty, the first person to truly stun Saul within the dark environment of the Wizard Tower. She was also the first mentor to show Saul genuine goodwill. Back then, she had seemingly seen through Saul's problematic elemental affinity at a glance, and had subtly offered him guidance. However, in general, Monica's presence among the mentors was very low. She had very few students, and her specialization was very narrow. Other than the third-rank apprentice Jiro, Saul didn't know if she had any other students. Perhaps this was the downside of being forcibly promoted one-on-one. Thinking carefully, Mentor Monica and Saul now could both be considered Gorsa's students. But in terms of how much attention they received, Monica clearly fell far short compared to Saul. And now, Gorsa couldn't even be bothered to keep the homework Monica submitted. Would someone treated like this not feel some resentment toward Gorsa? Saul turned back around, silently exasperated at Gorsa, thinking, "You really are fearless with your strength, going around making enemies everywhere." Chapter 397, getting involved. No matter how much Saul was complaining inwardly, Gorsa always did things his own way. At this moment, he was intently focused on the stone coffin beside him, not at all concerned with how Saul had dealt with the notebook that had fallen to the ground. It wasn't until Saul walked back over that Gorsa half lifted his eyes. "You look quite spirited today. Seems like your experiment has made good progress." Saul directly dragged Bill over behind him. Although Bill was only a second-rank apprentice, he was fairly well known within the Wizard Tower thanks to his third-rank top-tier brother, Billy. "I'll just demonstrate it for you," Saul said straightforwardly, without wasting words. He used Bill's corpse to give Gorsa a live demonstration. Saul's experiment was aimed at the special repulsion effect between vessels and soul bodies. Although he hadn't yet figured out the source of this repulsion, it didn't stop him from using his own experience and the reactions of the four souls recorded in the diary to delay the onset of the repulsion effect. However, Saul couldn't allow his soul body to directly enter the vessel in front of Gorsa, not yet. After all, extracting his soul body still required entering the mental realm. That was Saul's trump card. It couldn't be exposed so easily. Even without a soul body entering the vessel to provide direct feedback, as someone who had been conducting resurrection experiments for decades and had studied countless soul bodies and vessels, Gorsa could understand the gist just by observing Saul's process. Naturally, Saul didn't make Gorsa guess blindly. He respectfully presented his research notes. Gorsa read through Saul's latest notebook and used his special methods to inspect Bill's corpse, then fell into a long silence. After quite some time, Saul himself started zoning out, already pondering whether he should change locations for his dream excursions tonight, when Gorsa finally spoke. "I thought you would start from the soul body." His voice was somewhat conflicted. It was clear he saw the feasibility of Saul's method, but was also quite covetous of Saul's unique soul body properties. Saul, of course, understood. Back then, the reason Gorsa had taken a liking to him was precisely because Saul could completely merge into others' bodies without being repelled or polluted. That was a trait countless wraiths and vengeful spirits would kill for. At this point, Saul spoke candidly. "I did try to understand my own peculiarity, but you likely know too, Master. Understanding oneself is often the hardest thing of all." Gorsa nodded. "Self-awareness is as complex and indistinct as exploring the void." Saul continued, "I also tried to study the origin of my peculiarity, but unfortunately I truly don't know. In fact, I don't even remember how I entered this body, and before I came here I wasn't a wizard at all." Gorsa nodded again. "The last part, I believe. Ignorance like yours can't be faked." So basically, Gorsa still held some doubts about everything else he said. But he wasn't digging deeper, probably because he didn't want to recklessly ruin such a rare and valuable specimen. Precisely because of that, Saul had to further emphasize his uniqueness. Before he had the strength to protect himself in front of Gorsa, he needed to make sure Gorsa couldn't bear to destroy him. "I've tried many methods to trace my own history," Saul added, "but they all ended in failure. I think maybe my level of knowledge simply isn't high enough yet." At that moment, Gorsa suddenly spoke up, "Or I could take a look myself." Saul froze. In that instant, countless thoughts raced through his mind. One ending where Gorsa peered into his mind and uncovered all his secrets. Another where Gorsa's invasive probing turned him into a vegetable. But what stirred Saul's heart the most was the possibility. What if, when Gorsa tried to explore his history, he encountered the same nightmare butterfly danger Saul once did, and then got captured by the diary, becoming Saul's servant? The very thought was thrilling. Saul spread his hands wide, his entire body trembling slightly. "If you wish, just be careful. There may be unknown backlash." Who would have thought? Gorsa immediately curved his eyes into a smile. Then forget it. And with that, he simply lowered his head again and resumed examining Saul's notes. Saul was left standing there, completely abandoned. His whole body felt drained. He didn't even know whether he should feel relieved or disappointed. But Gorsa had already shifted the conversation. "I can tell your experiment is quite mature," Gorsa said. "This doesn't look like something you just came up with recently. You didn't come here so cheerfully just to show off your results, did you?" Back to business. Saul stopped daydreaming and answered frankly, "Yes, master. I want to hear about the new resurrection experiment plan you mentioned. If you find it suitable, I'd like to participate." As he spoke, Saul patted Bill beside him. "Moreover, I believe my method is no worse than the blue water soul. In fact, it has one distinct advantage." "Oh, what is it?" "The materials for my method are all documented by the Wizard Tower. There are no unknown elements like the blue water soul, which came from elsewhere and hasn't been fully analyzed. Such exotic materials, though intriguing, could easily cause unforeseen accidents during the final experiment." Gorsa fell silent again. His silver eyes shifted from Saul's face to the notes in his hands, then to the stone coffin before him. Finally, his gaze returned to Saul. "How did you know I was about to start the final experiment?" "I guessed," Saul said, "but mainly because you suddenly purged the land drifters. That Captain Wilder, wasn't he the leader of the land drifters?" "You figured it out back then." "At the time, I just thought Master might be planning something major." Gorsa raised a hand and pressed it to his chest. "Things have progressed faster than I anticipated." He seemed unwilling to elaborate and waved it away. "If you want to join, then join. Besides the blue water soul, I've tried plenty of dangerous things. If your method proves better, we can use yours, or run both in parallel." Mission accomplished. Saul smiled all the more obediently. "Thank you, Master. May I also take the notes on the blue water soul experiment back with me to study?" Gorsa waved his hand indifferently, and a stack of books half as tall as a person appeared by Saul's feet. Saul quickly stored them in his compression bag. "From Baton Academy?" Gorsa asked, glancing at the bag hanging from Saul's waist. "Yes, I bought it on an airship, but it's probably not as convenient as your storage methods, Master." "They've been focusing on these little gadgets in recent years," Gorsa said, "but sadly, not delving much into the higher realms of knowledge. Heh, wizardry isn't meant for mass adoption. It could even bring disaster." Was Master Gorsa implying something deeper? Saul made a mental note of that. He too had once imagined that someday a powerful wizard might create a magical, modernized world. But from the sound of it, things weren't so simple. Wizardry, after all, was far less reasonable than science. Chapter 398: A New Interpretation of the Warning. After receiving Gorsa's permission to participate in the Blue Water Soul Resurrection Project, Saul was immediately kicked out of the 20th floor by the Tower Master himself. Naturally, this matter couldn't be hidden from the other participants in the experiment. Saul had been staying cautious, wondering if anyone would notice and try to ambush him. But he found that the enemies were even more patient than he had imagined. The first one to come looking for Saul, surprisingly, was his old buddy, Kelly. And again it was early in the morning, knocking on his door, disturbing his sleep. Oh, right, not sleep but dreams. Saul had searched for another whole night, and he was starting to doubt his previous speculations. Could it really be that the enemies cleaned up too thoroughly? Saul shook his head again. No, wanting to shatter the soul bodies was only to prevent the dead from talking. Saul had never seen any artifact capable of absorbing all soul fragments like the diary did, cleaning out all the malice so thoroughly. Besides, even when wizard apprentices die, the chances of forming wraiths or vengeful spirits were extremely low. Most of the time, they simply turned into regular spirits, wandering mindlessly, gradually shattering, and after a long time, dissipating into one of the world's energies. Kelly, seeing Saul deep in thought again, slapped him hard on the shoulder. Master Gyudo said yesterday that you're also joining the Blue Water Soul Project. I figured your question yesterday about adhesives must have been related to that. Haha, so I came early this morning to catch you. Catch me for what? Saul had shown Gorsa his experimental results and learned about the Blue Water Soul Resurrection experiment only to investigate the potential hidden dangers inside the gray matter. He had no intention of truly joining a crowd to conduct experiments. After all, his current research path was not only different from others, it was completely opposed. Actually, I still plan to. Come on, I'll treat you to a feast, Kelly said excitedly, a rare sight. At worst, just show up occasionally. Otherwise, how will you keep up with the experiment's progress? Even with his mind full of thoughts, Saul couldn't help but chuckle at Kelly's antics. Treat me to a feast? What, you mean something you made? Hearing Saul trail off, Kelly immediately picked up the thread. You know Master Gyudo specializes in the poison element, but not everything we make is poisonous. A lot of the materials are actually great. It's only after processing and mixing that toxins are produced. But Saul was no longer paying attention to what Kelly said afterward. He was thinking, if Kelly's feast counts as tasting something delicious, even though there was nothing particularly tasty here, it still reminded him inexplicably of the diary's distant warning. Madness calls out to you. You choose to ignore it. Chaos invites you to dance. You shake your head and refuse. Pain offers you a feast. You lay down your napkin. Resentment sheds its garments. You close your eyes. Could it be that the diary's distant warning wasn't only referring to Kangsha's invitation? Invitation, summoning. Saul had already linked madness calls out to you to Kangsha. Now, hearing Kelly's invitation, he was connecting pain offers you a feast to her as well. He suddenly felt that this warning might involve 4 separate choices. Could it be happening in chronological order? If so, has the chaos invites you to dance part already occurred? Saul pondered what incident could correspond to chaos and dance. If he had made the wrong choice at the time, the diary should have warned him. But it hadn't, so perhaps his previous choices were already correct according to the diary's warning. Forcibly speaking, when Penny asked me to observe the elven world, it could barely count as a dance. And at that time, Penny had been influenced by the elves' consciousness. She could be considered chaos itself. Saul's gaze fell on Kelly, who was still seriously and earnestly explaining the strengths and weaknesses of their lab. But why does Kelly correspond to pain? Is it because she's also involved in the resurrection experiment? The more Saul thought, the heavier his heart became, though his face relaxed more and more. All right, he suddenly interrupted Kelly, who had been chattering away. Huh? Kelly was startled by the interruption and lost her train of thought, forgetting what she was originally trying to say. I'll go check out your lab then, but I'll say this up front. I barely have any research background in poison element magic. That's fine. Honestly, the areas we're researching now are things we've never touched before either, Kelly said, waving her hand dismissively, settling the matter with ease. Come this afternoon at 2 o'clock to Master Gyudo's lab in the East Tower. You know where it is, right? Since Saul had delivered experimental materials to Gyudo a few times before, he naturally knew the location. After setting the time with Saul, Kelly turned and ran off. Her hair, shining with a metallic sheen, bounced lightly on her shoulders, reflecting her joy. Meanwhile, Saul's smile disappeared in an instant as Kelly entered the sloping passage. Back in his dormitory, he thought. Everyone participating in the resurrection experiment could face danger, But the ultimate target for these people is definitely the Tower Master, which means this resurrection experiment is riddled with traps. Gorsa can't be unaware of that. Either he's too confident, or he has some hidden cards I'm not aware of. Saul was very clear about Gorsa's strength. He was someone even other second-rank wizards deeply feared. But why would such a powerful person seem so oblivious to the undercurrents among his subordinates? Saul understood he could use Gorsa as a shield when necessary, but he could never rely on him completely. No matter what Lakai and the others plan, their actions have already crossed my bottom line. The first time was the sudden attack in Black Castle. Those people had tried to hint at Saul, hoping he would smash something at a critical moment. The second was Senior Byron's accident, and despite several nights of soul patrols, Saul couldn't find him. The third was the diary's warning involving Kelly. At the same time, the shadow hidden behind the Blue Water Soul Project, behind the resurrection experiment, definitely wouldn't let Saul off the hook even if he obediently followed their hints. More likely, those of them kept in the dark were just bargaining chips, spoils to be divided after the rebellion against the Tower Master. Lakai and Jiro can already be confirmed as enemies, but even with Lakai and the entire Mutual Aid Society, there's still not enough to scheme against Gorsa. Someone must be supporting them from behind. Ans is almost certainly involved, and Rum, who lives in the shadows, is very likely too. But now, Gyudo and Kaz, who are also part of the experiment, are harder to read. Tomorrow, I'll use the excuse of participating in Gyudo's experiment to carefully observe him and his assistants. Saul's spirit was taut, like a drawn bowstring. But he wasn't afraid. Even if he had to fight a group of mentors and senior apprentices, Saul had the Tower Master Gorsa, the ultimate weapon, behind him. No matter how meticulously the enemies prepared, they only dared to skulk in the shadows. Meanwhile, Saul was confident he could make all their efforts go to waste. He packed up again, put on a calm face, and prepared to step forward once more. Let's start by ending the Blue Water Soul experiment. Chapter 399, Radioactive Toxin. Gyudo's laboratory was huge, and he had quite a few apprentices under him. When Saul entered, he found the place bustling with activity. It seemed that every apprentice with a bit of skill had been summoned by Gyudo. This was a scene rarely seen in Kaz's laboratory. Even if Kaz called all his apprentices into the lab, everyone would just focus on their own work, and any interaction between them would be minimal. One or two exchanges would already be considered a good relationship. Unlike here at Gyudo's, it was like a bunch of students crowding together to compare answers right after finishing an exam. Saul's arrival didn't cause much of a stir. He stood at the doorway, deliberately lowering his presence, then extended his mental energy to eavesdrop on the apprentices' conversations. No matter what element these people had originally majored in, after following Gyudo, their research projects all seemed to involve toxins to some extent. Take Kelly, for example. She had been doing perfectly well studying metal properties, yet somehow got drawn into researching metal toxicity, and with a hint from Saul, she even managed to create radioactivity. Kelly was among the group too, at the very back of the room, enthusiastically mixing potions. The more she researches, the more addicted she gets, Saul silently griped. While observing, Saul also noticed that Kelly faintly had the air of a big sister among them. Though she was only a second-rank apprentice and hadn't advanced to third rank yet, many people were obediently following her orders. Wizards valued strength, and knowledge was a form of strength too. As for someone with a status roughly equal to Kelly's, it was a third-rank apprentice Saul wasn't very familiar with. That was odd, because Saul also spotted Billy sitting alone in a dark corner of the room, looking gloomy. There were plenty of powerful third-rank wizard apprentices in the wizard tower. Billy might not be the absolute top, but by Saul's judgment, he was definitely among the top 3. So why was he now seemingly exiled, sitting alone in the shadows? At that moment, the busy Kelly looked up and finally spotted Saul standing at the doorway. Actually, some others had noticed Saul before she did, but none of them dared approach, just quietly keeping an eye on him. "How long have you been standing there? Why aren't you coming in?" "I saw Lady Kelly busy, so naturally I didn't dare disturb you." Kelly rolled her eyes. She knew Saul was joking and didn't bother questioning why he had been standing there for so long. "Come on in. We're about to start making the adhesive to send to the mentor. You can watch." Without hesitation, Kelly pulled Saul inside, completely ignoring the expressions on the faces of those who saw Saul. They settled at a workbench cluttered with materials. "I've already talked to Master Guido. He said you can follow me around as long as you don't purposely waste ingredients. I told him you wouldn't, or I'd beat you up." While she was talking, Kelly's hands didn't stop moving. She skillfully grabbed test tubes, beakers, crucibles, and began preparing a potion in front of Saul. "What I'm doing now is optimizing the adhesive." The master didn't even bother giving it a name, just left it lying around. "What if we need to optimize it again later? Are we supposed to call it re-optimized adhesive?" Kelly was clearly in a good mood, talking a lot more than usual. Even several wizard apprentices nearby were glancing over in surprise, including Billy in the corner. "Then just call it better adhesive," Saul played along. "And if there's a third optimization, superior adhesive. And a fourth, ultimate adhesive." The two of them joked while completing the preliminary processing of the adhesive. Finally, Kelly held up a cup of bubbling, sticky fluid that really did look like glue and said, "Actually, what I picked up earlier was a semi-finished product. It takes a long fermentation process to get from raw materials to semi-finished goods. You can just read the notes for those steps. I trust you'll understand." Carefully carrying the beaker, she led Saul toward the back of the room. Along the way, everyone they passed quickly moved aside. Or rather, they were avoiding the beaker in her hands. "I noticed a lot of toxic materials in the semi-finished adhesive you were processing." Saul followed leisurely behind her, almost with his hands behind his back. "Of course. Although it's called an adhesive, you know what it's really for, forcing soul and flesh to fuse together. It's incredibly aggressive, so naturally it contains a lot of toxic substances. If you haven't seen them before, there's a list hanging by the experimental bench you can check." Most of the materials Kelly used were unfamiliar to Saul. Although he had read quite a few materials books besides basic knowledge of all things, many items here were semi-finished products from secondary processing. There were so many that even the apprentices working here needed lists to keep track, lest they mix things up. At the far end of the lab were two huge spherical glass domes. Both floated atop a metal control platform about the size of a table. Complex magical formations were inscribed across the control platform. With just a glance, Saul recognized floating spells, as well as sealing, unlocking, and even explosive runes. "This is basically a magic-type safe," he marveled silently. The two spherical glass domes on the control platform differed greatly in size, one about a meter in diameter, the other no bigger than a soccer ball. Each contained a thumb-sized, irregularly shaped piece of bronze-colored metal. Complex magic formations were also etched onto the surface of the domes. Because the engravings were on curved surfaces, the runes and patterns were visibly distorted. Someone unskilled in sorcery formations might not even recognize what they were looking at. Saul, however, had a good eye for such things, and immediately realized this was an enlarged version of the alpha necklace formation Kelly had given him. Sure enough, Kelly pointed first to the smaller dome. Alpha. Then she shifted her finger toward the larger dome. Weakened Alpha. She shrugged, though her arm holding the beaker stayed steady, and added, "Yeah, I'm not great at naming things. You want to name it instead." "I'm no good at naming either. Weakened Alpha is very straightforward." Kelly glanced at him. "Well, if you insist, let's call it Beta." Seeing her eyes start spinning mischievously, Saul hurriedly raised both hands. "No more names. I can't keep up. Next thing you'll have me calling them Shook, Tom, and Jerry." "Fine," Kelly drawled exaggeratedly, giving up on making Saul name every single poison concoction she invented. Then she turned around, still holding the bubbling beaker steadily, and called out loudly toward the room, opening the cover. Saul immediately had the vivid impression of a tree falling. He noticed several wizard apprentices around him, reflexively stepping back 2 paces. Those who were handling delicate work also paused. Saul felt a chill run down his spine but forced himself not to retreat. After all, Kelly was right in front of him. Instead, he focused his mental energy into his soul armor spell, ready to activate it at any moment. Under Saul's watchful eyes, Kelly extended her pinky and traced an intricate pattern along the magical lines on the weakened Alpha Dome. The glass dome shuddered alarmingly, then quickly stabilized and turned red. Steam gushed from the top, seemingly part of a cooling process. Kelly swiftly pulled back her finger and inverted the beaker she was holding, fitting its mouth precisely over the spot where her pinky had stopped. At that exact moment, a small opening appeared in the dome. Saul now noticed that the beaker's mouth wasn't flat. When pressed against the glass dome, it perfectly matched the curve of the sphere. Though tilted, the glue-like fluid inside the beaker only oozed down extremely slowly. Meanwhile, Kelly moved her pinky to another spot and started tracing again. When she finished, the small opening quickly closed itself. Kelly waited a few more seconds, making sure there were no leaks, before lifting the beaker away. Then she raised the seemingly unchanged liquid and shrugged at Saul. "No helping it. Radioactive toxins are just that fussy to work with." Chapter 400: Anesthetics and Targeted Drugs. This is the optimized adhesive. Saul took the beaker Kelly handed him, lowered his head to take a look, and said, "The color is almost transparent with a bit of a pungent smell." "Yes, this adhesive actually mixes in a lot of special materials, including the beta compound we just discussed, which are toxic. So when using the adhesive, it causes significant pain to the soul body. If the soul body resists too violently, it could cause tearing, damaging both the soul and the vessel." Kelly stared at the beaker in Saul's hand, frowning slightly. "But most of the toxicity inside can't be removed, or if it's removed, it would affect the adhesive stickiness. So right now, our research direction is to find a way to reduce the pain the optimized adhesive causes to the soul body without decreasing its adhesiveness." She watched Saul take a deep breath and said, "If we can pull this off, we can move on to the final test." The final test was when Lady Yura would personally step onto the stage. If it succeeded, then the resurrection experiment that had taken decades would finally be declared complete. Even if it wasn't perfect, even if it involved some bending of concepts, it would still lift the shackles from most people inside the wizard tower. Looking at Kelly's sparkling, expectant eyes, Saul only managed a soft "good luck" before turning his head away, unable to bear it. On the surface, the experiment seemed near its end. Even Saul's own preparations to delay vessel rejection might not even be needed. But Saul knew it wasn't going to be that simple. If the resurrection experiment could really end so smoothly, then the gray matter shouldn't have become Senior Byron's death sentence. From this seemingly stable and smooth experiment, Saul sensed a faint, creeping unease. The calmness on the sea's surface was just an illusion. The storm might be about to break. When Saul turned around, He happened to be facing another experimental station, and Kelly followed him over. Thinking Saul was curious about the experiment here, she said excitedly, "This is a little idea I had, to separate the soul body and individually paralyze the consciousness. But I'm not really an expert on souls." She patted Saul's shoulder. "That's where you come in, genius boy. No wonder you were so eager to rope me into the experiment. You already had a job lined up for me." Saul tapped her nose, grumpily. Kelly showed no sign of guilt. She grabbed a pen off the table, stuffed it into Saul's hand that was pointing at her, and curled his finger around it, making him grip the pen. "Please, please. If you can pull this off, I'll even give you a surprise." "I'm holding you to that." Saul chuckled, withdrew his hand, sat down at the experimental station, and started twirling the pen while flipping through Kelly's earlier notes. Actually, the field Kelly was trying to research was something Saul had already dabbled in, and he'd made some progress too. However, much of that progress was thanks to the dead wizard's diary. Thus, when Saul saw Kelly's concept, he immediately thought of the black pages representing soul bodies, and how he himself had to replenish each soul body's soul energy. The basic knowledge of all things also mentioned that the soul wasn't a single, complete entity. It could be further divided. At the structural level, a soul could shatter into countless tiny fragments. At the energy level, after a soul's energy was stripped away, a soul body would remain, and even the soul body could be further split. A single thought, a single memory could be separated out. But a complete soul body couldn't exist alone. It needed the support of soul energy to keep operating. However, basic knowledge of all things only introduced the basics. It didn't cover any practical application. And despite having read many books on soul studies, Saul hadn't found any method to individually separate a soul body. Only the dead wizard's diary had achieved this. A soul's consciousness body could exist in the form of pages, turning chaotic thoughts into organized, clear sentences. The black pages could also integrate multiple fragmented souls, fusing their consciousness bodies into one. Because the black pages needed regular replenishment of soul energy, Saul had once wondered whether they were something other than a simple soul body, some special form of soul. But a normal, complete soul couldn't just replace all its soul energy like a full-body blood transfusion. Thus, the black pages were indeed a special way for a soul body to exist, one that could absorb external energy. In short, the more Saul learned, the more he respected and feared the diary. In many ways, the diary was absurdly powerful beyond reason. Just like those golden finger systems in novels, you could use them, but you'd have no idea who coded them or what rules they operated by. Saul stopped twirling the pen and looked up at Kelly. "You handle the anesthetic formula. I'll try to find a targeted drug for soul bodies." Anesthetic, targeted drug. Kelly repeated the unfamiliar terms twice, then quickly understood what he meant. "No problem," she gave Saul a thumbs up. Saul looked away and happened to catch sight of Billy, sitting off alone and absorbed in something. Using transmission magic, Saul asked Kelly, "I remember Billy's specialty is soul toxins. Didn't you discuss it with him?" He recalled that Billy had connections with both Locke and Jiro. The last time Billy had been threatened by Haywood, both of them had stepped in to help defuse the situation. Saul wanted to figure out whether Billy had played any role in this resurrection experiment. Kelly rested her elbow casually on the table and replied via transmission magic, "He's not involved. He's close to advancing. Ever since he surpassed his master's progress in soul toxin research, he barely participates in any of the master's organized experiments. He's fully focused on preparing for his advancement." Billy's about to advance. Saul had thought that aside from himself, the third-rank apprentice most likely to advance next was Haywood. But now it seemed that even among third-rank apprentices, Just like among first and second rank, the strongest wasn't always the one who advanced first. Thinking of Concha, Saul silently added to himself. The strongest didn't always advance at all. Putting down his paper and pen, Saul walked toward Billy, under Kelly's slightly puzzled gaze. Ever since we left Grind Sale Town, I haven't seen you. Heard you didn't come back for a long time. Were you injured when you left? Saul wore a casual, polite smile. Billy didn't stand up. He lifted his eyes to look at Saul, and the large expanse of whites in his eyes made him seem rather eerie. He was even gloomier than the last time they met. Escaped with my life, took half a year to recover. He asked Saul, "What about you? I didn't see you come out through the city gate." Saul replied earnestly, "The town has 2 gates." Billy didn't quite believe that Saul had fled in the same way, injured, soul body damaged, barely crawling out. But he had no proof. "Did you run into Lady Yura when you left?" "Yeah, actually, I owe it to Lady Yura that I even got out." "Why was she there?" Saul hadn't brought the red-eyed puppet doll with him on his trip to Grind Sale Town, and he had acted covertly. Logically speaking, Lady Yura shouldn't have known where he had gone. "I don't know why she happened to be there." "Was she alone?" Billy fell silent for a few seconds. "If Lady Yura didn't tell you, it's not my place to say." Saul raised his eyebrows slightly, thinking, "Now you remember to keep her whereabouts secret." On the surface, Saul just nodded. "Got it, secret mission, right?" He hadn't expected much from the start. Saul glanced at the materials laid out in front of Billy. "I won't disturb you then. Best of luck with your advancement." He had just turned to leave when Billy's voice reached him through transmission magic again. "Saul, don't get too involved in too many things. It's unnecessary and dangerous."